Thank you, Nick. The time is approaching 10 o'clock and, well, there's a lot to get through today. For example, have you ever had violent race riots named after you, or indeed been accused by the head of the Met of emboldening the racist thugs responsible? Has your vile and ignorant rhetoric ever helped instigate attempts to burn people alive in their beds? Have you ever cited a self-described misogynist facing rape and people trafficking charges in Romania as a trustworthy news source for events in the UK? Or described yourself as part of a similar phenomenon to him? Have you ever helped a convicted woman beater get elected to the UK Parliament? And have any newly elected MPs spent more time in America getting binned off by Donald Trump than they have in their own constituency? And what would you call someone who answers yes to all those questions?
James O'Brien on LBC.
I feel like I got kicked in the head by a horse. It's 3 minutes after 10. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we concern ourselves immediately with potentially, already incredibly important international matters, but potentially one of the most important issues of our age. I don't know what your immediate reaction was to the Israeli attacks upon Hezbollah members and anybody unfortunate enough to be in their vicinity, including, of course, completely innocent people and many, many children. 2,800 people injured yesterday. I beg your pardon, the day before yesterday, when pagers blew up, 12 people killed, and yesterday another 14 I think were killed and 450 wounded in cities across Lebanon, where the booby-trapped walkie-talkies also blew up. Now, I've, as you know, I've worried from the start that the inability to admit any criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu's regime, not of Israel per se, but of Benjamin Netanyahu's regime. I suppose you can conflate the two, can't you? They become, in a sense, the same thing in recent years, would embolden him to take ever more heinous liberties. And you can track it through the conversations that we've had on this programme. The way in which, at the very beginning, we talked about the necessity of Israel responding in incredibly robust fashion, the inevitability of the murder of hundreds of civilians being met with a equal and opposite force. Innocent Palestinians were going to die as a consequence of the terrorist attack upon innocent Israelis. Quite quickly after that, we started to explore the word proportionate, explore the word justified. I don't know when, for you, the word proportionate left the building, whether it was when the death toll in Gaza reached 10,000 perhaps, or 20,000, 30,000, or 40,000. And the final figure, of course, guaranteed to be incredibly higher than that, almost unbearably higher than that. People being bombed in schools, people being bombed in shelters to which they have been moved in order to ostensibly stay safe. And throughout all of it, the accusation was that this was either justified or, I think we can probably most agree now, quite laughably, the claim that great care was being taken to avoid civilian death. Propaganda from Benjamin Netanyahu's office, even making its way via a discredited journalist into the oldest Jewish newspaper in the world, into the Jewish Chronicle in this country, where enormous questions remain to be answered by people who have very much created an atmosphere in which people like me were once even not quite frightened, but certainly would think twice about speaking our mind for fear of being labelled all sorts of hideous epithets. But months after October the 7th, it became pretty clear. People started to say it out loud. People started to say out loud things like, members of Netanyahu's cabinet, including people who have had terrorist convictions themselves in the cabinet, started saying out loud that the notion that there were no such thing as innocent people in Gaza. But the mantra throughout was that the carnage was necessary in order to rescue the hostages. And in this country, I think we're probably, despite the best efforts of our friend in Jerusalem, Noga Tarnopolsky, we're probably not clear on just how little patience the families of the surviving hostages have with that idea or with that rhetoric. They largely feel enormously betrayed by Netanyahu and have done for some time. So that's Gaza. the idea that the carnage there was somehow designed to get the hostages released, I think disappeared over the horizon some time ago. And now they turn their attentions to Lebanon, which is an independent sovereign country, and to Hezbollah as opposed to Hamas. Hezbollah sponsored by Iran and responsible for launching rockets into Israel sporadically and repeatedly. But the escalation that we see now between Israel and a powerful militant group, to me, becomes the most frightening and the most significant example yet of this basic observation. It's an observation that has been in place since probably the end of October of last year, certainly early November, is that there is nothing Netanyahu will not do in order to protect himself, in order to shore up his position, regardless of what is best for Israel. And one of the hardest things that objective commentators have had to do is watch Benjamin Netanyahu sacrifice Israel's international reputation and hemorrhage what you could call objective or humanitarian support for Israel, which was arguably the highest it will ever be in the immediate aftermath of October the 7th. To watch Benjamin Netanyahu hemorrhage that, to throw, in many senses, that the liberal Jewish cause under a bus, to denigrate the notion of a two-state solution, which is regarded by everybody honest as the only way out of this historic mess. And the idea that there was nothing he wouldn't do, there was no depth to which he would not plumb in pursuit of self-preservation, is now, I would argue, impossible to resist. Because against all advice, despite the best efforts of the United States and the United Nations to avoid an escalation, the Israeli administration has undertaken a program of, well, I wonder whether you think the word indiscriminate has a place here. Whether or not you think the word indiscriminate has a place here. Because if I put an explosive in your pocket and have absolutely no idea where you will be when it detonates, is that an indiscriminate attack upon people? But where are you right now? Have a look round. If you're on your own in the car and you think this doesn't apply to you, what happens if the explosion renders you incapable of driving the car and you plough it into that queue of people at a bus stop over there? Just think about what would happen right now if a significant explosive charge were to be unexpectedly detonated in your hand or in your pocket. How close are you standing to people near you? Do you see? It seems to me to be an event that opens the door to accusations of everything up to and including potential war crimes. Because what do you think of? Or what parallel do you draw with previous proscribed groups? If MI5 had managed to secrete tiny amounts of explosives into the pockets of everybody believed to be a member of the IRA, and they then blew up while IRA members were going about their lawful business as opposed to their unlawful business. They blew up on the school run. They blew up in the queue for lunch. They blew up in a bus queue. They blew up in a market. They blew up in a hospital. They blew up in a doctor's waiting room. It seems to me you could be at a petrol station, says David. Unlikely in Gaza, given that most of it has been razed to the ground, but perfectly plausible and possible in Lebanon. And that makes me wonder what Benjamin Netanyahu wants. And I'm quite frightened of that question. Because, as I say, those of us who refuse to bend to the violent demands that we feel sadder about a Palestinian death than we do about an Israeli death, or that we feel sadder about an Israeli death than we do about a Palestinian death. Those of us who insist upon humanitarianism, who insist upon objectivity, look upon Benjamin Netanyahu now. Unless your blinkers are strapped so tightly to your head, you must fear what it is that he wants. This is an indiscriminate, and I would say, I'll add arguably in order to be, what's the word I want? Even-handed, an arguably indiscriminate attack on an entirely new front. How does this rescue hostages? How does this help hostages come home? Answer, it doesn't. So the idea that Israeli violence, that Israeli attacks, Israeli assaults are justified by the necessity of bringing the hostages home has just disappeared over the horizon, like all of the other Israeli excuses and Israeli explanations for the continuing carnage in Gaza. No one can argue that. You can talk about the rockets, of course you can, and we must. They, of course, fly in both directions. But you want to look at death tolls, you want to look at effectiveness of weapons, and you are, to coin an unfortunate phrase, you are, I'm afraid, looking at a conflict of David and Goliath proportions. Except on this occasion, David, you can work the rest out yourself. So, what does he want? You follow these matters. Quite possibly you follow them more closely than I do. It's important to get the question right. What does he want? This order will have come from the same place that all of the other orders have come from. The retreat from the claim that it was proportionate is now complete. The retreat from the claim that all attacks were designed to free hostages has now disappeared over the horizon, that the claim that Israel went to enormous lengths to protect civilian life has been rendered, if it wasn't already, completely ridiculous. What does Benjamin Netanyahu want? How can anybody argue now, as the prospect of World War III arguably teeters closer to plausibility than at any time since the Bay of Pigs? How can anybody really construct an argument against the idea that all Benjamin Netanyahu wants, and the only reason that he's doing this, is to postpone his own judgment, to postpone forever longer the moment of accountability? And I guess in his heart of hearts, in his dreams, he hopes that he can postpone it forever. It is 14 minutes after 10. Janet says, the war is no longer about rescuing hostages. If they had been released, this would have been over. Why don't you say that? Because, Janet, and again, I appreciate it's sometimes difficult to get a proper handle on this from the UK end of the media circus. Netanyahu made it clear some time ago that the release of the hostages would not signify an end of attacks in Gaza. And you have to explain to me how releasing hostages in Gaza would have prevented Netanyahu from launching these arguably indiscriminate attacks on a completely different territory against a completely different enemy. And please, don't just reach immediately for the cliche or the slogan. Just try to answer that question. If this is still about hostages that he said the release of would not signal an end in hostilities, then why is he now attacking a completely different enemy in a completely different region who, at this point in history, haven't taken any hostages whatsoever? So what do you think he wants? 0345 6060 973. What do you think he wants? Hit the numbers now, you will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
15 minutes after 10 is the time. I'd mostly enjoy your messages into the programme, but if you're going to seek to justify this, you need to explain to me how the fact that 1/3 of the people killed on Tuesday evening were children. 9 dead, 3 children. So you need to explain to me how surgical that is, how much evidence that provides of concern for civilian life. 3 dead children, 1/3 of all the deaths caused by... And how can you not call it indiscriminate? And an indiscriminate attack upon a civilian population, even via the vessels of suspected terrorists, that is itself susceptible to an accusation of terrorism, or indeed of war crimes. So what do you think Benjamin Netanyahu wants? John's in Bristol. John, what do you want to say?
Hello, James. Okay, right. You've thrown quite a lot of stuff up against the wall. So let me address the main question.
Just one question, John. What do you think Benjamin Netanyahu wants?
He wants continuing war. He wants a regional war. He wants a wider war. He wants probably, and him and his buddies, because there's quite a few of them in that cabinet, that would like to see the destruction, the ethnic cleansing of all the Arab people from the river to the sea. He was I think he was the first to actually quote that line, by the way.
It definitely wasn't the first, but it was included in Liquid Party literature.
Exactly. And to your other point, so that's what he wants. Because he's in big trouble, right? So, as soon as
it's not feasible, is it? What you describe, and also,
of course, it's feasible. This guy is a nasty, nasty piece of work.
But it doesn't. I mean,
to...
how does the attack on Lebanon advance that particular cause?
Because he wants a wider war. He wants to drag Hezbollah into a full-scale war, and Iran along with it, and everybody else, and they're all going to kick off. And to your other point about, of course, those attacks in Lebanon were indiscriminate because they weren't targeting these people on the battlefield. They were out and about. They were doing a school run. They were shopping. They were in the barber shop, right? And the people around them also got horrific, disfiguring injuries.
I saw a doctor describing the number of eyes that he had been compelled to surgically remove. But you and I don't know how many of those eyes belonged to Hezbollah members. We do know that a third of the people killed on Tuesday night were children, and we do know that if an explosive went off in our pocket now, the idea that the carnage, the damage, the injury or the death would be confined exclusively to the people in whose pocket that pager was, presuming that you had some way of ensuring that it hadn't been stolen or borrowed or lent to somebody else, ditto walkie-talkies, then I mean, you'd have to conclude that the word indiscriminate at least has a possible place in this conversation. Two Johns, one in Bristol, one in Dublin. To Dublin next. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
nice to talk to you. I think what Bibi Netanyahu is trying to achieve, he's trying to force the Americans' hand to get them to commit troops or greater, so that he can...
Well, that's never going to happen. Not under Biden or Harris. I don't think it would happen under Trump either.
But certainly under Trump. He
tends to look the other way, doesn't he? And then just make ludicrous claims about how if only I was in charge, none of this would have happened.
Yeah, except if there's some element of conflagration, Trump is going to have to step up to the plate and commit, and Biden is going to have to do the same. And when you're talking about, I don't know, 44,000...
but why go? Because if you look at the map, Israel is hemmed in, if you like, to the north and the south by Lebanon and by Gaza Strip. And if it were possible to escalate the attacks upon civilians in Gaza, supposedly in pursuit of combatants or in pursuit of the rescue of hostages, then you'd probably have a point. But an attack upon Lebanon, how does that advance the cause you describe?
He was in the UN with the Greater Israel map, the map that covered all of Jordan, I think all the way out to the Euphrates, and all the way to into the Sinai region.
But how much of that? And listen, this is a slightly, I don't know quite what the word is. It maybe seem like a glib question or even a simplistic one. But how much of that is rhetoric designed to appeal to his base, as opposed to a bona fide ambition? Do you see what I mean? I think that distinction counts.
Yeah.
That may be a naive question. I hope not. I really hope not.
If you look up on social, well, not social media, but YouTube, you can see an actual interview that he did in private, that was filmed privately, where he was talking about Greater Israel, and this dates back like 15 years. And probably longer, and he's always been a warmonger, and he is an old man, and he's going to put himself in the history books for the state of Israel, for Zionism, and I think he's really going all out to
get to the bigger the conflagration, the bigger the shield for him, the bigger the war, the bigger the battle, the safer his position becomes. I hope you're wrong. I don't know if that is an important distinction. It's always a little bit, what's the word I want? Possibly depressing when you are thinking deeply about events in which people especially children, are being killed. You know, when you sort of treat it as an intellectual exercise. But I think that you have to. I think you have to try to work things out. You have to think about things deeply. It is a human reality. Since long before the time of St. Augustine, who's one of the first people whose thoughts on the subject survive, the notion of a just war has engaged humanity. And in wars, humans die. But the distinction here, specific to this conflagration, is the distinction between, if you like, imperial ambitions of Benjamin Netanyahu or territorial ambitions, if you prefer, whether built on imperial grandiosity or whether built upon a genuine or manufactured sense of security. You honestly believe that by taking over this territory, you make a greater Israel safer for everybody there, for all the Jewish people that live there, or you've got some sort of territorial imperial ambition. The distinction between that, between what you would call, you know, the interplay of warfare and diplomacy, and the complete naked self-interest of Benjamin Netanyahu is what I'm trying to unpick this morning with your help. Because I don't know whether this is wishful thinking somehow. I would much rather believe that this is the naked self-interest of Benjamin Netanyahu than a genuine desire to undertake whatever you want to call it, ethnic cleansing, some people would say genocide, or mere territorial annexation, further occupation, further illegal occupation of new territories, or simple war, endless attritional war, bringing Iran into it. Whether or not naked self-interest drives Benjamin Netanyahu, or whether it is something more militarily traditional. I hope that makes sense. It does to me, at least. So that's a start, isn't it? Thank you, John. Michael's in Acton. Michael, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Thank you. Very, very interesting debate, as always. Yeah, I mean, I think you really have to view, October 7th was a terrible tragedy, but all Israel's credibility is gone now. I mean, you've got two separate incidents of over 3,000 separate explosives being, through the walkie-talkies and through the pages, being exploded simultaneously, indiscriminately. I mean, you nail on the head. I think the international significance of this, it just hasn't been picked up. And this is the largest act of international terrorism probably that has ever existed in humanity. What definition of terrorism are you working from there? Well, I mean, because you're remote controlling explosive devices indiscriminately, which creates terror. Basically, so some people might be involved in Hezbollah operatives. I mean, it's a mass assassination attempt at best of those operatives. But some of those might not even be that responsible for.
Well, we can be fairly confident the 3 children killed on Tuesday evening were not fully paid up members of Hezbollah.
Well, absolutely.
And also, if we're going to be really philosophical about it, even if they were, they're not capable of responsibility, personal responsibility, criminal responsibility in any internationally recognisable sense.
I mean, it's not just the deaths that are significant. It's the eye injuries, the hand injuries. You know, in fact,
well, that's terrorism, I suppose, is what you're saying, is that by sowing that among a population without any way of knowing whether the exclusively culpable people were going to be affected, then you have sowed terror in the dictionary definition of the word. I don't know where the legal definition would kick in. How do you distinguish between territorial ambition, whatever drives it, and naked self-interest? Can you distinguish between territorial ambition and naked?
Yes. I mean, basically, everybody knows that when Netanyahu loses his tenure as prime minister, he's looking up to 10 years in jail for corruption, fraud, and embezzlement charges. So he's very, very. So he can't let go of being in office. So he's having to kind of subscribe more and more to the far right of the sort of Zionist movements to maintain his tenure. Now, so would he rather Israel go up in flames, the whole region go up in flames, so that he doesn't get arrested and incarcerated? I think he did. I think the guy's a maniac. I mean, it's look what's happened in Gaza. I mean, October 7th was an absolute tragedy, but there was a huge amount of intelligence failure surrounding it. And then the delays coming into to actually rectifying. I mean, demilitarizing all of the surrounding communities close to Gaza, taking away the weapons, which those kibbutz residents were not happy about. The IDF took their weapons, they demilitarized them, according to threats from the months preceding October 7th. So, the delays in getting there. So, there's a lot of preventable deaths, which, they should never have been able to get across the border fence, the most highly militarized fence in the world.
Okay, now absorb into your analysis the fact that Hamas is dedicated essentially to the destruction of the modern state of Israel and the removal of all Jewish people from that territory.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree. That's another extreme. I don't necessarily subscribe to that as correct thing. But if you'd been brought up, locked up as a second-class citizen with no rights whatsoever in an enclosed, sort of effective giant concentration camp, you'd be pretty aggrieved. Where literally you can't leave, you can't do anything, you have no real voting rights, you have no say. Your people are being forced.
But you know what you're doing now. You're flirting with justification of. No,
I'm not justifying. I'm just taking objective.
Well, if you take an inquisitorial approach, what would be an acceptable mode of resistance to what you describe? To the
moment, you are losing the whole of Gaza rather than getting these hostages back. I mean, the whole destruction. You got 40,000 people dead, 30,000 children dead. Basically, I mean, that's not a way to negotiate to release these hostages.
No, the total figure at the moment is 40,000. Although I think most independent international observers, the ones that can get into the Gaza Strip, which isn't many, of course, and the ones that can't, expect that figure to be much higher in the end. And we speak of hostages. It was just earlier this week, actually, 9 days ago, that the cousin of one of the hostages slain in captivity, murdered in captivity, said that it's military pressure that is killing the hostages now. I think he's the one who described Netanyahu as a psychopath. So we failed as a country, we failed as a community. This is Gil Dickman, whose cousin Carmel Gat survived 11 months in Hamas captivity before being killed in a tunnel in Gaza just before Israeli forces arrived. And as we've covered on this programme, that the feeling on the ground in Israel is far from homogenous. But how do you separate? Maybe they're the same thing. Maybe Netanyahu's naked self-interest has transmogrified into the territorial ambitions that are increasingly on display. I don't know. But what do you think he wants? 0345 6060 973. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:35 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Some other news around and attendant upon the conversation we're having about what the thinking is behind Benjamin Netanyahu's escalation of, I don't want to say tensions, because people, including children, are dead, but what is his vision? What is he hoping would happen? You should also know that Germany has stopped approving new arms export licenses for Israel. That's been put on hold pending legal challenges, according to Reuters yesterday. And also the UN General Assembly has voted overwhelmingly to direct Israel to leave the Palestinian occupied territories within a year. That resolution was passed yesterday by 124 votes to 14. This is the first since 1982 to advocate sanctions against Israel, although I stress the vote is non-binding. It is evidence of how much goodwill, if that's the right word, support certainly, and sympathy most definitely for the people of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu has personally hemorrhaged over the course of the last 9 or 10 months, 1036. And the question of why, of course, remains. Why is he doing these things? Why is he pursuing this course against the advice, against the importuning of his closest allies, most obviously the United States of America? I think I saw Anthony Blinken saying they had no idea that this was going to happen, so that the notion of having gone completely rogue again becomes increasingly hard to resist. It is 10:37. David is in Kilburn. David, what do you think Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to achieve here?
Hi, good morning. Well, it's difficult to understand what Benjamin Netanyahu's personal motivations are. He does seem to be regarded by a lot of people that know him and have known him as a total self-serving narcissist. But I do think it's helpful to understand what any prime minister of Israel would do. And as far as I understand, if it were Benny Gantz or Yair Lapid or anyone like that was the Prime Minister of Israel right now, in regarding Hezbollah, I think they would behave in a similar way, because Hezbollah joined Hamas after October the 7th in bombing Israel, causing tens of thousands of Israelis to have to leave.
Ehud Barak is a former Israeli Prime Minister, and he has come out with precisely the opposite view.
That's true. Ed Barak does.
So, you're speaking about people who have never been Israeli Prime Minister, and your point is somewhat undermined by someone who has.
That's true, but
I appreciate it's difficult. I appreciate it's difficult to understand his personal motivations, but everybody else has had a go. So how much of a distinction can you draw between what you might call territorial ambitions, whether driven by security concerns, either real or confected, and his personal agenda, his personal self-preservation?
Well, I have no way of distinguishing between his different ambitions, but I do know that...
You do. You've got, with respect, you've got a functioning intellect. We can all think and arrive at conclusions. The world of opinions, David, is rich and varied. What's yours?
I think going into someone's motivations is pure of someone I've never met or spoken to.
But you were telling me a minute ago about Israeli politicians who would definitely be completely supportive of exactly the same tactic, which was entirely speculative as well.
Right. I think that anyone...
Just to clarify, what I just said is correct. You just said you can't speculate about someone's motivations 2 minutes after speculating about two people who aren't Israeli Prime Minister and claiming they'd be completely supportive of this attack upon Lebanon.
Well, I think that...
Just want to be clear I've understood you correctly. That's what you just did, isn't it?
Yeah, so I would make a distinction between motivations and the responsibilities.
Yeah.
I think it's the responsibility of...
The responsibility is a motivation.
Yeah, but some people could perform their responsibilities as a Prime Minister for the right reasons, some people for the wrong reasons. And I have no idea whether Benjamin Netanyahu is performing his responsibilities from the right reason or the wrong reason. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, let's think about. Hang on a sec. Let's think about reasons why some people, many people, most people think that it is the self-preservation. Let's think about the legal problems that he faces in the event of leaving office. How big a driver of Benjamin Netanyahu's conduct? I suppose you could ask the same question about Donald Trump. Do you think that the fear of prison is?
Again, these are purely speculations, and I don't think it's helpful.
That's what the phone-in is about, and you did ring it voluntarily.
That's true, but I would.
But you thought you were going to be able to make points completely independent of the conversation that everybody else is having.
No, I think I'm trying to point out that this speculative conversation about motivations, I think, is intellectually immature.
Okay.
And I think it's better to speak about the subject in terms of, was Israel right in their attack against Hezbollah?
But that's an opinion.
That's an opinion, right? Yeah. We can talk about it in, like you said.
So you think I'm going to go out on a limb here and say you think Israel was right in its attack upon Hezbollah, despite the civilian casualties?
I think, as you said...
So what is it designed to achieve? Sorry, forgive me. You do think that?
I think what, sorry?
That it's justified?
I think that it's justified.
So what is it designed to achieve? And that's where the phone-in began.
It's designed to achieve the defeat of Hezbollah.
Okay. In the same way that the attacks on Gaza were designed to achieve the defeat of Hamas?
Indeed.
How's that going?
Seems to be going pretty well. Okay. The Hamas as a military functioning army has been largely destroyed. I think that Israel, in order to defend its citizens who are living in the north and have been displaced, have to defeat Hezbollah. And this is and attacking their members seems to be a straightforward, common sense way of beginning the fight against Hezbollah.
So the displacement of civilians justifies almost any mode of attack upon the people responsible?
I mean,
because that would have to work both ways.
Citizens were displaced.
That would have to work both ways.
Hezbollah was trying to. The citizens were displaced because Hezbollah were trying to kill them.
Yes, but I'm thinking about other displaced people and the idea that their representatives would be entitled to deploy any tactics whatsoever against the people responsible for their displacement, which to go out on a limb, I suspect you don't agree with.
Absolutely not. But it's not Israel's attack on Hezbollah is not a response to the displacement of its citizens. It's a response to Hezbollah trying to kill its citizens.
Right.
And that's why the citizens have been moved to prevent Hezbollah killing them.
And Israel tried to kill citizens of Lebanon this week.
Well, it tried to kill Hezbollah terrorists
indiscriminately, without any concern for civilian life.
I mean, here's the question: where what you said in war.
I hope it's not an intellectually immature question, David.
Well, one thing that did seem to be intellectually immature was that you said that in war, citizens devastatingly get killed.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, you seem to say that this attack against the Hezbollah terrorists was wrong.
Yes,
because
this isn't happening on a battle. This isn't happening on a battlefield. This is happening in a civilian space, which moves it into the realms of terrorism. Whether the missiles are being fired from Hezbollah into Israel, or whether the explosions unfolding in Lebanon as a consequence of Israeli intervention, the targeting of civilian populations, even if there is an enemy combatant in the middle of that civilian population, you can't have one rule for one side and another rule for the other, can you? You can, but you shouldn't.
How do you attack Hezbollah terrorists who are embedded in a civilian population without endangering civilians?
Well, there's the question.
Exactly.
So why has Benjamin Netanyahu done it?
Because you can't kill Hezbollah terrorists.
And how do you, to turn your question back upon you, how do you attack the Israeli military or the Israeli government without running the risk of your missiles hitting civilians?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're there. We're looking at a form of moral equivalence. We're looking at moral equivalence.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
I'm glad. I agree with you. There is a moral equivalence between the actions of the terrorists and the actions of the Israeli military. It's just most people are a little bit reluctant. Most people who would justify the attacks upon Lebanon are a little bit reluctant to concede that. Thank you. I applaud your honesty. 10:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. A headline in the Times today caught my eye. It is to this that we will turn our attention next. Nearly 4 million on sickness benefits as COVID still takes toll. There's a curious out of sight, out of mind attitude in some quarters to the continuing impact of COVID and the fear, indeed, that the UK may, as a consequence of the length of waiting lists, may have been more ill-prepared, less resilient than the populations of other countries. We're going to have a proper look at that after 11 o'clock today. Emily Maitlis joins me at 11:45 to give us a little preview of the latest television drama to address her seminal, epochal interview with Prince Andrew. I don't know, she'll probably tell me off for this, but you know how there's been one other drama based upon that interview. You know how Taylor Swift re-released all her albums after Scooter Braun bought the master tapes, and she didn't like the fact that she didn't have control of her own master tapes, so she re-recorded them all and called it Taylor's version. So you've got Red, Taylor's version. I think that this drama, and she will tell me off, no doubt, at 11:45 if this is an inaccurate representation of the facts. I think you could describe the drama whose release is imminent. I think with Michael Sheen playing Prince Andrew, I think you could describe this as Emily's version, which of course makes it altogether more important than the other one. I could be wrong. We'll find out with Emily at 11:45. And then, of course, at 12, it's Mystery Hour. Although we have already asked quite a lot of questions this morning before the programme even started properly. Back to the question of what we think Netanyahu actually wants. And it may be an immature inquiry, but it strikes me as a profoundly important one. David is in Brackley. David, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, a little nervous and emotional, really.
I'm sorry.
if you cast your mind back to the 80s during the Iraq War, Netanyahu, I believe, was either the ambassador to the UN for Israel or the Israeli ambassador in Washington. I can't remember what. And he came across. He was on the TV all the time during that period in the UK. Came across as eloquent, single-minded, reserved, intelligent, and articulate in Israel's reaction to the war at the time, and put Israel in a very good light in what they would have done.
Ambassador to the United Nations, I think, between 84 and 88. Would that be the one?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. And if you look at him now, it is the prime example of power corrupts, because back then it was non-political, and he was voicing the opinion of many Israelis, both living in the UK and in Israel. And today...
Are you including yourself in that constituency?
I am, yeah. Okay. I'm British-born, but I lived in Israel from the late 70s to the mid-80s. I served in the army over there too. Okay. I came back in 87. His actions since October have been to preserve his power and to preserve his to stop him going to prison. I mean, no doubt that it is all self-interest, and in another, and slightly in a lesser way to appease the ultra-right wingers in his coalition government.
It's the same thing, really, isn't it? I think without the support of the ultra-right wingers in his government, the sort of jaws of justice loom ever closer to him, don't they?
Sure, and that's absolutely the case. I think what I find so difficult to accept is that if you look at the last elections in Israel, he got a massive proportion of the vote, so it wasn't 50%. So there are still many, many Israelis who will be on his side and agreeing with what he's doing. There's a lot that don't. There's a lot of us that do not, both living in Israel and overseas.
How do you absorb into your analysis the possibility of security being a driving force? The idea that he genuinely believes, as David in Kilburn suggests, that Hezbollah are eradicable, that Hamas is eradicable. I don't know what the map of the Middle East would look like after a quote successful end quotes mission in that field. But I mean, his supporters will claim that what he's doing is necessary for the safety of Israel.
Well, there's no question that Hamas, both Hamas and Hezbollah and all of the Iranian proxies are evil, and they need to go. The question is whether what's happening in Gaza, or what's been happening in Gaza, and the latest events of this week are actually will achieve it, and I honestly don't believe it does.
That's the kicker, isn't it? That's the absolute kicker, because you speak from a position of profound concern for the future of Israel, and believe that the current administration is actively working against the future security of Israel.
I do. I mean, if you look at what's going to, so all we are doing in Gaza are creating more resistance for the future, rather than actively working towards a two-state solution. And I know the Palestinians poo-pooed the two-state solution 15, 20 years ago.
Sure.
But that's 15 or 20 years ago. We've got to start again, and the only future for Israel and the Palestinians is for them to live together under their own government.
Is it a bit like, I mean, a few comparisons with Trump, which are always a little bit too easy to make, but is it, in your view, the case that he doesn't look beyond the next horizon. It reminds me of Boris Johnson in a way, although the stakes are considerably lower. It's all about just getting through the next news cycle, hanging on for another day. So he closes his mind to the possibility, or I think for both of us, David, the inevitability that what's happened in Gaza stores up enmity for another generation and a generation after that, which is going to be ever harder to unpick. He doesn't actually care about that or think about that because he is driven by the sole priority of self-preservation. Yeah,
I mean, Netanyahu wants to stay out of prison.
That's it. That's the end of the clock, in many ways. The end. So blowing up these devices in Lebanon makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to. It does nothing for the 60,000 displaced Israelis in the north of the country who are desperate to get back home, including friends of mine. And it does nothing for the security of Israel in general. All it is doing is protecting his power base. And
is that an infinite project? I mean, it can't go on forever, can it? Or can it?
It can't. Well, I mean, the last two elections, I honestly thought he wouldn't get back in again.
Right.
And I don't vote. I don't vote in the Israeli elections, but I mean, I talk to my friends, most of them are left leaning. I come from a kibbutz. I come from a kibbutz background. Right. Probably explains a fair bit, but I'm astounded that he's got back in the last two elections. Okay. I'm also astounded that Trump's getting in on the other side of it. I mean, how can 50% or so of the population like what Trump stands for?
Well, we need to have that phone in, David. We're not having it today, but you're absolutely right. It's on my list. Before you go, and I don't think this counts as prying, I think you had a personal investment in the events of October the 7th.
I have my cousin's son was murdered on October the 7th. So Jake Marlowe, he was a British young British lad, and so that's very close to me. And two friends from my kibbutz have lost children, so it's tough. But that doesn't mean that what's been going on in the last week or the last year, if we're talking about Gaza, I can justify. I mean, I can't justify the killing of children and innocents. I just can't.
Whoever is doing it.
Yeah, whoever's doing it, absolutely. I mean, it's. I believe there are other military ways of achieving the goals that need to be achieved, but indiscriminate setting off pages and electronic devices where innocent people are going to die. I don't see that as a solution.
David, thank you, and I'm sorry for your loss. You honour his memory.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Cheers, James.
Cheers,
thank you,
David. And I look forward to your call when we do address the subject of how on earth half of America, and of course some people in this country, can still be supportive of Donald Trump, despite the catalogue, not just of actual crimes, but of course of obvious depravity that now constitutes his CV. It's coming up to 10:59. Can I squeeze in Hassan in Cheshire? Can you do it in a minute?
I can try my best.
Go on then.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that basically the root of the do not underestimate ideology as a motivating factor for any of the players involved.
Well, I do on this one. Oddly, I don't normally, but with Netanyahu, do you really think it's more ideological than self-preservation? Null.
Self-preservation may play a role, but if you look at his statements over the decades, he's always said that he does not believe in a two-state solution. And he has openly suggested moving the population of the West Bank into Jordan, or even the population of Gaza into Egypt itself. So,
but again, we're back to the question of how much of that is held in his heart of hearts, and how much of it is part of the process of self-preservation. To which I guess we may never know the answer. But you're right. You're quite right. He wouldn't have said so many things so repeatedly over so many years if they were just examples of very recent and temporary opportunism. Hassan, I warned you that you only had a minute. Tim asks a slightly chilling question from Blackpool. Was it just good luck that none of these devices were detonated while the carrier was on an aeroplane? I presume that the range would be relevant. I mean, I don't know if it wasn't very far off the ground, or it was coming into land, or it was just taking off. I don't actually know, Tim. I hadn't thought of that. And I don't know whether the people claiming that the attack was justified would be able to include an explosion on an aeroplane, whatever the consequences of that would be, in their support, in their defence. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Moron on LBC, where last time I checked, Donald Trump had made, this was in 2021, 30,573 false or misleading claims over just 4 years. But yeah, that's right. Whenever he says something that sounds crackers, it usually turns out to be true. 4 after 11, as I say. Okay, I don't want to sound bossy, but the conversation I want to have now is about public discourse. It's about the health service and about governments. It's not about, although we will touch upon this, it's not about the experience of long COVID itself, because for the record, I know exactly what that can be like. It is a conversation about why this is the first headline I've seen in a long time that says nearly 4 million on sickness benefits as COVID still takes toll. So 2.8 million people are out of work because of long-term sickness. This could see the benefits bill pushed up to £63 billion. In much the same way that Haitians in Springfield are not eating cats or dogs, so it is not easy to get yourself signed off on disability benefit or indeed sickness benefit. And just because you might know someone who knows someone who knows someone who apparently managed to do so very, very easily is not evidence of a broader malaise. It's a grim and difficult business, not least given the difficulty of getting a GP's appointment, which is, of course, down to years of austerity and morale-sapping government policies. 2.8 million people out of work because of long-term sickness. So the bill could go up to £63 billion. At the outset of the pandemic, it was about 30 billion. So it has more than doubled. This is the Institute of Fiscal Studies, a reputable organisation looking at the 3.9 million people claiming either incapacity benefits, where they are classed too ill to work, or disability benefits, which can be claimed irrespective of employment. So yet more evidence that some of the rhetoric surrounding these kind of benefits is it's just wrong. It's just false. The City of London is the only place that hasn't seen an increase in claims since 2019, 2020. I mean, not many people live there, and the people that do are likely to be very much in the upper echelons of most socio-economic measures, but not all of them. Blaenau Gwent in Wales has seen 20% of adults aged 16 to 64 claiming benefits. That was 16% before the pandemic. And Blackpool, from where Tim sent us that troubling question about aeroplanes, the figure has gone up from 15 to 19. Wealthy areas are much, much lower. That's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? If you live in a wealthy area, why are you less likely to be signed off permanently sick? Answer, well, you may not need the relative pittance that the state provides you with, but also your quality of healthcare will be higher. There's a reason why life expectancy in poor areas. Do you think that would be the same conversation? Why is life expectancy lower in poor areas than it is in rich areas? I remember someone telling me about the Central Line. It probably doesn't hold now because of development, but when I first moved to London, every stop that you went east on the Central Line, your life expectancy dropped a bit. It was an extraordinary statistic. I'm afraid I never triple checked it, but the point stands statistically that the poorest areas of the country host the lowest life expectancy. And I wonder whether that is simply the same reason. Why would long-term sickness be more prevalent in the poorest areas? It will be everything from lifestyle to diet to aspiration, whatever you want to call it. But it's clear that our response to COVID And there's nothing going on in other countries. So that's going to be the topic, by the way. The author of the report describes a dramatic increase everywhere in the country, but no clear explanation for it. He said it was surprising that we haven't seen anything like this in other countries, and suggested that Britain may have been less resilient to COVID due to long NHS waiting lists. I don't know, but I think you might. So why do you think there has been a post-pandemic surge in long-term sickness? And I prefer to have the conversation that way around, rather than a long-term surge, a post-pandemic surge in sickness benefits. Because although there are always people swinging the lead, although there are always people telling lies, whether it's about Haitian immigrants or responsibility for inciting race riots, or whether it's about the ease with which you can get sickness benefits, or the determination of some people not to work. There will always be lead swingers. There will always be wrong-uns, fraudsters, liars in our midst. But if you take them as representative of the whole, then you're on a path to absolute madness. So, why does Britain display a dramatic increase in long-term sickness in ways that other countries do not? All right? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. It's 9 minutes after 11. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Edwin Latimer, the author of the report, describes this dramatic increase everywhere in this country, but states, and I quote, "It's surprising that we haven't seen anything like this in other countries." Now, some of the claims will, of course, involve mental health. They will not all be linked to long COVID, but I find, not just anecdotally now, that there is some research, but nowhere near as you might expect, that people who have never recovered from COVID, why would that be more prevalent in this country than in other countries? Why? Because that has to be a factor. It's not just me that thinks that. It is cited by the author of this report. If you're looking to understand why there's been an exponential increase in long-term sickness in this country, I would say there are two obvious reasons. The first is a surge in mental health problems among young people, which has quite a lot to do with how we handled COVID. I'm a little bit more sympathetic towards some of the decisions that were taken on the altar of better safe than sorry. But, for example, with schools, the memory of Gavin Williamson opening the schools in the morning and closing them again in the evening just speaks of chaos. It doesn't speak of better safe than sorry. It speaks of making it up as you go along. So if I have any regrets from that period when we were on air, it would probably be giving them the benefit of the doubt and thinking that they were actually acting in our interests based on evidence, when in fact they were just trying to second guess what the front page of tomorrow's Daily Mail and Daily Telegraph would conclude. So the first would be the mental health surge in young people. And the second would be, I think, the long tail that COVID has for millions of people. We spoke to a teacher not long ago whose life has been ruined, absolutely ruined, and who believes that she will never recover. I know people who have undergone a lot of treatment, almost all of it paid for privately, and some very successfully have come out of an 18-month-long hellscape, really, of exhaustion, of absolute fatigue, of physical and mental consequences, brain fog, people who know now that they're still not right and are pretty confident, albeit they might not always have a diagnosis, which is part of the problem we're discussing. They're pretty confident that their health problems are attributable to their experiences of COVID-19. I say during the pandemic. It's not over. It's bubbling away constantly in the background and always threatening to spike again. So that's why the vaccines are such a godsend, such an important part of public health provision. But why Britain? Why the UK? Why does the UK have a bigger problem in this field than any other comparable country? So the three variables here, the three factors are... I'm told that I've misused the word exponential, and I'm more than happy to accept that. So it's not exponential, you're right. It's a large increase in long-term sick, right? It is mental health, particularly among young people, and the long-term repercussions of COVID among older people, I would suggest, because the length of waiting lists is cited as a reason for it. That's one answer to the third question, or rather one factor of the third variable, which is this. The UK is much worse than anywhere else. So why? And you can come at this from any angle that you want. You can, 13 minutes after 11 is the time, come at it from a place of international comparison, 0345 6060973. You can come at it from your own personal experience, the failure to look after you properly, the failure to address the condition that you have because of the confusion and even sometimes it seems the obfuscation surrounding the very phrase long COVID. And you could come at it from the angle of why specific to this country. What are they doing in other countries that we are not doing here? So that's the conversation, all right? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I want to know why you think, drawing either upon an overview, upon thinking, and the more countries you can compare to, perhaps the more pertinent your contribution will be, or upon personal experience, why the UK has seen a significant rise in long-term sickness levels compared to the pre-pandemic equivalent, and other countries have not. That's the crux of the question that I'm asking, all right? 0345 6060 973. There's one elephant in the room, isn't there? And that would be, it is arguably, well, inarguably, the shiniest jewel in the crown of our post-war settlement, with the possible exception of the welfare state. But could it be that the NHS was so battered and so beleaguered by the time that the pandemic came along that it actually handled the long-term ramifications of that virus worse than other countries that haven't got an NHS? That's just an elephant in the room. It's a possibility. It might be an imaginary elephant. But it's important to acknowledge its potential existence. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. It's 11:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 17 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I just want to take a moment to comment on how much I love the band Blossoms. Have you come across Blossoms on your travels? What an amazing band Blossoms are. And my admiration for Blossoms has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I've just been sent a photograph of Joe, the drummer from the band, reading How They Broke Britain by James O'Brien. But if you haven't checked out Blossoms, check them out immediately. It's a shame we can't play music more on the programme. I played a bit of Pulp yesterday. I don't know if you were here for that. That Kemi Badenoch story took off, didn't it? No one had noticed it. When we started talking about it yesterday. And everyone missed the best bit. Everyone has still missed the best bit. We still got the clips ready from yesterday. Because the best bit of it was the claim in the same interview that she claimed working in McDonald's when she was 16 automatically made her and immediately made her working class. My favourite bit was the chaser, not the shot. The chaser was that I never need to apologise because I think so carefully about everything I say that I never commit any gaffes. Extraordinary. But we're not talking about. Have we got them? But should we have? Well, before 12 o'clock, before Mystery Hour, we'll remind ourselves of that because this is a serious conversation. Why is the situation in the United Kingdom when it comes to long-term sickness, comparisons between post-pandemic and pre-pandemic, why is it so much worse in this country than in others? Anne is in Penrith. Anne, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting to get on so quickly.
No, I know.
Yeah,
You must have said something amazing because I think you just got pushed to the front of the queue, Anne.
It's surprising.
Carry on.
Yeah, I don't think that it is much worse in this country than it is in other countries. So, in other countries, I mean, so for example,
well, it is.
in
Sorry,
America,
I mean, crikey, I don't want to jump on you immediately, but the bloke who's written the report states we haven't seen anything like this in other countries.
Well, in America, for example, Bernie Sanders has been talking a lot about long COVID and the impact that it's been having on the nation's health. And they are starting to acknowledge it widely, that there are hundreds of millions of people around the world who've got long COVID. So in terms of they are now implementing nationwide policy. The CDC over there has started to acknowledge the impact that it's having. And they're also, they're changing their messaging now, and they're telling the population about the danger of repeated COVID infections. They're also recommending air filters and cleaning the air. So their messaging is changing because they realise the impact that it's having.
He's called for a moonshot, hasn't he, Bernie Sanders? He talked about a $1 billion injection in addressing long COVID legislation to help the 22 million adults and 1 million children across the United States, and as you say, millions more across the globe. I sense that you're talking about yourself here, Anne. We, myself and my husband were infected in October 2021, and overnight it just changed our lives. I spent over a year in a wheelchair. I couldn't work, couldn't look after my 2 small children. Repeated infections are a constant concern, and so it's just really difficult to. And how does the system respond to the condition? I mean, do you encounter scepticism? Do you see what I mean? The very phrase "long COVID."
I know people do. Other people have encountered scepticism. I didn't, because there was no question mark over the fact that COVID caused my long COVID, because it was obviously caused by the COVID infection, because it just destroyed me. Whereas I think other people experience scepticism because they will have their COVID infection, they will think that their symptoms are mild and it was just a cold, and then there's a slight delay between when they've had their COVID infection and when long COVID starts to hit them. And so then people might say, oh, well, maybe it wasn't that, maybe it was something else. But that's not obviously true.
When did you know that something very odd was happening to you?
Oh, well, what with my long COVID? Straight away, it just hit me like a truck, and I was just in agony. It wasn't. It's annoying when people talk about feeling tired or fatigue and those kind of things, because it was just pain for me. It was just like unbearable pain that I couldn't. You can't move with. So
how are you now?
It was. Well, I've been lucky because I have found some things that have helped, but the things that I have found that have helped have not been anything that I have been pointed towards or directed to by any medical professional in this country. So no GP, no A&E doctor, no long COVID clinic. I've seen a neurologist, a cardiologist, an immunologist. I've seen loads of people, and it's not scepticism that I've experienced.
What is it then?
It's apathy, to be honest.
Okay.
And shoulders shrugging, and time, and positive thinking, and it's probably going to get better. We don't know very much about it, and that just doesn't wash anymore, because we do know a lot about it, and there are lots of people who are experts in this area who are not given a platform, and they are not. So continuously, when you see in the media about long COVID, they platform the same people repeatedly. And there's a reason that the same people are being asked questions about long COVID, because they will give the message that the government wants to be put out. Don't worry about it. It will probably get better with time. It's not that big a deal.
Why do you think the government want to put that message out, particularly when we're surveying a situation where 4 million people are on long-term sickness? I mean, it's economically... It's economic sabotage not to address this properly.
It is, absolutely. I 100% agree. I think personally that there was an article written recently in the Byline Times about a wall of silence. I personally think that it would require such a huge shift in messaging and in behaviour and in what we're doing. If they acknowledge that repeated COVID infections are having a serious impact on the population's health, they will have to act. And not only will they have to act and implement policy and reintroduce preventative measures, they will also have to acknowledge that they have sanctioned repeated infections. They have even, you could say, encouraged repeated infections, and said, don't worry about it, carry on, go about your life. It's not going to be a problem. You don't need to worry about it.
Can you turn that oil tank around now? Because that was the sort of let the bodies pile high would be the extreme of what you're describing, and the idea of everybody gets it and that builds up resistance.
Well, it does, and I think now we're seeing that was a terrible, terrible thing to do and say. And so in order for them to turn it around, as you say. They'll have to acknowledge that it was partly their fault that all these people are now chronically ill. You can't just say, oh, well, it's fine to catch COVID and let all your children catch COVID. We know that it impacts children's health now as well. So if they acknowledge that actually what we told you to do was a really bad idea and now we are seeing the results of that, that means that they are accountable.
But it is a different government. It's a different government. So
which is why I think there's so much. I think there's kind of some hope in the long COVID sort of community that maybe Andrew Gwynn, who is the new public health spokesperson, maybe they will change the messaging. Maybe they will acknowledge the car crash that is slowly happening, because he himself had long COVID and he really struggled. And so we did think, I think, collectively, well, maybe he's going to be the person to sound the alarm and say, well, hang on a minute, should we be letting all of our children be infected repeatedly? Are we all actually damaging our health long term? And at the moment, he hasn't said anything, but I've still got my fingers crossed that he's going to...
And it's significant, perhaps, that the phrase appears, that the condition appears in this analysis from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Anne, I'm sorry for what you've been through. I really am. I'm going to crack on with your permission, because there's quite a lot of people waiting to know. Thank you. And I guess everybody listening with a personal investment in this, similar to Anne's, will feel that sense of out of sight, out of mind, that sense of closing the conversation down from the highest level. We'll feel it very keenly. Obviously, Idiot's Corner is always active, always busy, although not so much today, actually. Too busy, too full of people telling me how much they enjoyed the talk up at 9:59 this morning. I can't think what was so special about that. Morning, James, writes an idiot. It's simple. Cases of long COVID are worse in the UK because the public know they will be paid by the government because they are signed off work, which is a position of ignorance I think you have to get up very early in the morning to fully achieve. I think in France you get 50% of your basic daily wage when you're signed off sick by the doctor. Off the top of my head, indemnité journalière de sécurité sociale. But hey, why let the facts stand in the way of your determination to hate on your neighbours? 11:27 is the time. Richard's in the Mendip district. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
I'm a retired GP. First, I want to say that I don't think there'll be one factor. There'll be many, many factors.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
Absolutely. But the one thing I do want to say, which is most important, is we learned absolutely nothing from COVID. And what I want us to learn is that if you're ill, stay home and rest.
Oh, tell me about it.
Okay, anyone gets a viral illness, they feel like they feel very, very weak, and they don't want to get out of bed. Don't get out of bed. Stay in bed. Take it easy. Pull the duvet over your head if you have to.
Yeah, but you won't get paid. So our friend in Idiot's Corner is wrong on every imaginable level, not just the ones that he's capable of counting. Because you in other countries that is an option, but here, if you're on a 0 hours contract, if you're self-employed, if you've got a boss that is unsympathetic, generally speaking, you've got fewer rights than you had before David Cameron became Prime Minister. It's all very well for you, retired GP Richard, to tell people to stay at home, but add the cost of living crisis to the assault upon our workplace rights, and some people will feel they literally have no choice but to drag their virus-ridden carcass into the workplace.
Don't tell me. Don't tell me. I've said this.
I know you know. I know.
Stay home, and they say I can't stay home. I've got to go in.
Yes.
Give me antibiotics. Give me a certificate.
Yes.
And it is madness, and it's completely bad business practice.
Of course it is.
If you're a business and you encourage people to come in with a viral illness, what the hell do they expect is going to happen? But the whole office is going to go.
Talk about mic muffs. What about mic muffs, Richard? What if someone's spluttering all over the mic muff, and then you have to come into a radio studio after them and speak into the same muff and breathe their filthy germs?
I know. It's as if we're back in the Middle Ages and they think it's coming from a miasma or something.
I hear you.
Really, we're not applying science to how we work.
Well, this country has had enough of experts. Didn't you get the memo, Richard? Back in 2016, the country has had enough of experts, and that perhaps is part of the reason for why we find ourselves in the mess that we are in. Thank you, Richard. It's coming up to 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Why does this country have a bigger problem? And Richard didn't allude to this, but I will. already right-wing media, the usual suspects, the people who brought you Brexit and austerity and Liz Truss and Boris Johnson and all of the abominations that have accompanied all of those phenomena, the same people that brought you that are already attacking the new government for paying too much attention to workers' rights. And what right was Richard, the retired GP, just talking about? The right not to have an infectious colleague sitting next to you, spluttering COVID all over you. I stay at home, not just COVID, of course, but the other thing that should keep you at home, and you come to work and then everybody's ill. It's 11:30. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11. So why in the UK? Partly, I guess that you had a period of denial. You know, the COVID inquiry is still underway. It's the only time Dominic Cummings apologised. Or rather, I think Dominic Cummings is the only one who ever apologised for the fact that and I should get you his words, actually, because they don't get broadcast enough. And I doubt they'll be in the book that Boris Johnson is publishing later this year, when Dominic Cummings effectively, and remember, even a stop clock can be right twice a day, Captain Eye Test, essentially admitted that the people in place when the pandemic hit were the worst imaginable personnel to deal with a crisis of that scale. I'm going to find it for you, forgive me, because I think it's really important. I've got the clip, actually. I'll maybe even play you the words, but the words that he said were, when the public needed us most, the government failed. Can we get that clip ready, actually, Joe? And I'll just play it out. I think it was during his evidence. And that must be part of it, because the scale of the failure has to be kept secret. If the answer to the question, why is this hitting the UK harder than everywhere else, is because the UK government, led, of course, by Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, messed up on such a spectacular scale that the combination of COVID and the length of our waiting lists, a consequence of policies brought in 2012 by Andrew Lansley and of austerity in general, David Cameron's brainchild, created the environment in which we have a much, much bigger problem with long-term sickness post-pandemic than any other comparable country, then until 100 days ago, it would have been in the interests of everybody in government to keep a lid on it, to keep it quiet. Which is why perhaps our first caller was optimistic about the possibility of the new government taking it a lot more seriously. Now that's Occam's razor, isn't it? That the simplest available explanation is almost always the correct one. Why have we got a much bigger problem with this? Well, because the people in charge messed up and now need to keep it quiet, except they're not in charge anymore. Claire's in Wimbledon. Claire, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, this is a subject that's actually very close to my heart because my darling goddaughter actually developed long COVID. I actually remember taking her mum to the hospital with her and they were just saying, it's just a chest infection. Yeah. You're over the top. It's ridiculous. And
well, they didn't say that. That may have been the impression you got, but they never said don't be ridiculous.
Oh, no, sorry. That was
That's all right. I like to defend the doctors. But yeah, you got an impression that you weren't being taken seriously. And God knows, sepsis has taught us children are often sent home at death's door and being told just to take a fisherman's friend and have a lie down.
Oh, absolutely. And, and fair play to the NHS. During that time, they were incredible. Under so much strain, so apologies to the doctors there.
I'm just being grumpy, sorry.
Oh, it's all right. I know what you like. And we went back at least 5 times, and then at home, she was just awful. They actually got to the point where they came and stayed with me and my family. Yeah. Transpired that she had COVID, and if you'd seen this child, she was 4 years old. She was absolutely magnanimous. She was outgoing, absolutely out there, loads of energy, ate everything, ate all the fruit and the veg you could want.
What are you doing while you're talking to me?
Sorry, that's actually her making something.
Is she with you? Well, then in that case, I shall enjoy the background noise because it sounds as if she's in a slightly better place than she was during the period that you're describing.
Right, so basically she was like a typical kid, ate the strawberries, ice cream, bananas, the whole shebang. Overnight, she went from drinking milk, drinking juice, to only drinking water. Her appetite went from eating everything like I just described to only eating rice, pasta, chicken, and things like that. And they said, well, it's a milestone that some children go through. This happens, you've got to persevere. And my friend, bless her, was at wit's end. She was like, no, this isn't right, something's not right. And it has now eventually, after nearly 2 years, being discovered that she has suffered with long COVID. And what they've described it is, like, if you turn off your computer and you haven't saved your work, you turn it back on and half of it's gone, you need to reprogram it. And basically, because of her and the way she is, if you're weaning a child at 6, 8, 9 months, whichever one you want, it's okay because you just stick a spoon of food in their face and they eat it. That's how. You've now got to try and do that with a now 5.5-year-old. But it's not easy because you know yourself, if something's put in front of you and it doesn't look nice and you're worried about it, you are not going to want to try it. So and also it turns day into night and night into day.
Right.
So her sleep completely, because of the fatigue and everything, and because of the pain she was in her joints, she couldn't sleep. So she turned day into night, night into day. So now this is why she's with me today, because
she was
even though
night.
She's been up all night, and my friend has to go to work because she's been up with her all night.
Top godmothering, Claire. Top godmothering.
Oh, thank you very much. But what I was trying to say was,
Yeah.
I think the whole thing with this is that because it wasn't taken so seriously, and I think also the kids, I know they had lots of time off school and they shut down the schools, but I think initially they were kind of like used as the good, it's all right, kids don't get it, it's fine.
Yeah.
If you get
They
it,
do.
it's
I mean, I
absolutely
know
fine.
that
They do get it.
Westminster and Chelsea Hospital had a long COVID clinic for children 3 or 4 years ago, but it
100%.
doesn't seem to have bitten, does it? It doesn't seem to, the long term.
And I think also because you had the kids, like, and I know like the hospital workers, bless them, they had to send it, because I know the schools were open for like special, like people like who had to go to work and things. They were being infected, and then they were sending kids in, and it was just, and then they did the eat out to help out. It's all right, it's not dangerous, but it's okay. We'll give you a tenner to go and have a pint, but don't go too close near each other.
Yeah, that
it
was in
ridiculous.
Retrospect, that was a moment of epic madness, wasn't it?
But just while I'm on the phone,
quickly.
while I'm speaking to you, because of this long COVID, can I please put a shout out for a charity called Long COVID Kids?
Of course you can.
They're an amazing.
No, you
amazing
definitely
charity.
can't. How dare you?
I know. It's
Out of the
awful.
question.
I've done it now.
I know, I'm teasing.
And also, I think there's another one for adults as well, Long COVID. They're on Facebook, and they can give you so much information. They've been so incredibly helpful.
And you
my
speak
friends.
to the absence of some of the support and information that you might need from the sources that you might expect to get it from, which isn't an allegation or an accusation. It's just an observation. But finally, Claire, if I may have missed this, in which case forgive me. I was distracted by the charming chinking in the background. When was the first moment, when did a medical professional first use the phrase long COVID to describe your goddaughter's condition?
After they basically tested for autism and things like that, because they thought she had a neurodivergent symptom, and they said, no, it's absolutely not that.
And then they said it's long COVID.
And then this guy came along, and the consultant at the hospital they turned around and they said, no, this looks exactly with every a carbon copy of long COVID, absolutely.
Do you know, you've just made me realise something, actually, that I hadn't realised before. And in the context of dealing with it in the moment, we know how absolutely harried the NHS is, the length of the waiting lists, the sapped morale, the consequences of austerity and being treated like scum by various and successive Conservative governments, the real-term pay cuts for junior doctors. They've got so much to do. Long COVID, in a way, comes along and says, hey, you can barely cope with the workload you've already got. Here's another massive consideration for you to take on board for no thanks. You can understand why the resistance might be subconscious. We've got enough problems with things that have already got names. We've got enough problems with things that we studied at medical school without you bringing me stuff that I didn't study at medical school. And that observation comes from a position of sympathy, I promise, not from a position of criticism. And speaking of where the help comes from, this is good from Andy. My wife went from triathlete to bedbound for 2 years. She clawed her way back to about 95% of health, but we had no knowledgeable help from GPs or long COVID clinics. I hate to say that most of our successful help and advice came from a fellow sufferer who pivoted their fledgling YouTube channel to the analysis of scientific papers and interviews with experts in this field. Part of the problem is that protocols that work for us are not offered by the NHS. For example, hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Unfortunately, writes Andy, my wife has relapsed after a repeat infection. So we've re-implemented the protocols and found that she's very slowly recovering again. But it's early days. Even after all this time, health advice is still non-existent. I think the phrase viral load springs to mind. And here's that clip I was telling you about, because, you know, the people queuing up to get cross about largely meaningless stories now that Keir Starmer is Prime Minister were very, very keen to completely ignore this.
The truth is that senior ministers, senior officials, senior advisors like me fell disastrously short of the standards that the public has a right to expect of its government in a crisis like this. When the public needed us most, the government failed. And I'd like to say to all the families of those who died unnecessarily, how sorry I am for the mistakes that were made and for my own mistakes at that.
Yeah, rare that. And you know, I'm a bit naive, as you know, sometimes. I give people the benefit of the doubt when I shouldn't. It's known as the curse of O'Brien. But I felt that was sincere. Listen, he's as mad as a box of frogs. But I do feel that was sincere. It's in some ways the most surprising chapter of how they broke Britain is the one where I write about Dominic Cummings, because out of all of the people from this period of British politics, he's the only one that wasn't obviously in it for himself. For money, for power, for book deals, for professional advancement. I'd say it again, mad as a box of frogs, but I take that apology at face value. It doesn't cancel out any of the other stuff, of course, but that must be one of the biggest reasons why the UK finds itself in a measurably worse situation than any other country. Emily Maitlis up next to talk to us about the dramatisation of her epochal interview with Andrew Windsor. Probably the most significant interview since Frost Nixon, although she'll no doubt blush at the very suggestion. And after that, of course, it's Mystery Hour. Glancing at my switchboard and indeed my inbox, if I can just wade through all the lavish praise. I don't understand. I just did a normal talk up at 9:59 this morning. Why is everybody getting so excited about it? If I can just wade through that for a moment, then I can see that this is a subject very close to an awful lot of hearts, and therefore inevitably and guaranteed a subject to which we will return. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It is out today. A very royal scandal. It is a dramatisation of my friend and colleague Emily Maitlis's. What adjective do you like, Emily? Because I would say epochal. I would say profoundly important. Seminal. What adjective do you like to describe?
I'm just going to let you go on finding synonyms for the next 10 minutes. That's lovely of you. Thank you.
Interview with Andrew Windsor, or the artist formerly known as Prince Andrew. Where do we begin? Do we begin with the moment at which you knew, not necessarily that this would be an interview for Newsnight that would end up making headlines around the world and spawning several dramatisations, but the moment at which you knew something truly extraordinary was happening in the room?
Well, I would say we start with the drama, actually, because the drama is an incredible just piece of viewing. It's funny. It's sharp, it's really sensitive, actually. It's quite respectful. And I know you're a fan of Michael Sheen, and I'd say he is just jaw-dropping in this. And he does something with the character that I wasn't expecting, which is sort of complete him. And he takes it away from anything that looks like comedy villain, anything that looks like a sort of slam dunk idiocy. He's not. He's a father figure, an approachable dad, a sort of loyal ex-husband, if that doesn't sound too strangled, and a devoted son, and a former hero. You know, he sort of returns from the Falklands to adoration. And so I would... there is something quite Shakespearean about what Sheen does with the role, which is to show the sort of the fall from grace. And actually what we do is we put the interview in the middle of the three parts. And for my money, the third hour is actually the best, because you just see the sort of this colossus shrinking. And it's quite a thing to watch, actually.
You say we, which speaks of a heavy involvement. I mean, it's based on your memoir, isn't it, this one? And you've been involved in the production yourself?
I've been the exec producer.
What does that mean?
I know, it's a really good question. A brand new thing for me, and a slightly uncomfortable one.
Go on.
Actually, because the Andrew interview is a chapter in my book, Airhead, and when the rights to that were bought, they said, we just want to make this as the drama, but we want your thoughts and memories and all the rest of it. And actually the chapter is very short. It's just literally what happened at the Palace that day. But I worked with the writer in terms of building, I think, a bit more context around it. So, what was the environment like? What was the political environment like? I mean, in the middle of one of the questions I got from Jeremy Brock, who's this brilliant, thoughtful writer, was, tell me about 2019.
Right.
And I did. And I started in January. And you remember the frenzy of that period of history for us, the Brexit votes and the tensions and the sort of Steve Bray in sort of College Green and the noise of just the sort of the Remain and the Leave and the sort of the clash of just so much noise around politics at that time. That's how I remember it, as being a really noisy time. And we were so involved in that. We weren't really looking elsewhere. And I sort of think of the Andrew interview as popping into the middle of this sort of political chaos, and everyone kind of drawing breath and going, oh wow, so that was part of my involvement. So it
needs the context to make sense of the moment.
A little bit. I think it does a bit, because it wasn't something that we had been chasing,
No.
For sort of years. It had been something that we had kept an interest in. Sam McAllister had started the bidding process, I think, a year earlier, and we had been offered him sort of earlier that year. But there was something about that moment of November. We'd had the prorogation of Parliament in September. We had a brand new landslide majority government under Boris Johnson just a month later.
Yes.
And so I quite liked having this sense of the context into which it fit. And part of my job, I think, as EP, was just to bring some of the memories and to bring the newsroom in. And you'll know the sense that I'm sure you share this, the sense of cringe when a newsroom is badly done on TV. You just go, no, we don't. No, we don't speak like that. It's always sort of faster and a bit more brutal in real life. And I think I wanted to inject some of that speed and adrenaline and sort of, edge of carefreeness into it as well.
And your home life as well, which I sense wouldn't be the most comfortable thing in the world for you to want to have on screen.
I think at one point my son suggested that he could withhold the rights to his portrayal, which sounds like a very normal thing for sort of kids to do. And so I had to sort of work out how I'd get around that. And actually what we did was we made the kids much younger in this. So it wasn't quite as embarrassing
for them to...
Yeah, exactly. To have to... I mean, they're gone now. My eldest is 20 and came to see... It was lovely, actually. Came to see the premiere in New York. And at least said to me that he liked it. It wasn't something he was sort of found absolutely dreadful, but that was important as well. And I think that process was interesting for me because I began thinking, how can I make this as lifelike as possible? And then I suddenly thought, actually, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that at all. I don't want that kitchen to look like my kitchen.
Sure, you don't have to, do you?
You don't have to.
The identity of your appliances is not crucial to the narrative.
It's not crucial. The dog, I think, was the most lifelike member of the family.
You talk to the dog a lot.
Well, I do.
Yeah.
I mean, we have quite a passag, relationship, but we talk a lot.
And I guess I mention Brexit on every programme, as you know, but it's important to understand where you are. Everyone who listens to the newsagents will know that you've been enormously liberated by your arrival at Global, and that you left the BBC with some ill feeling or unhappiness, I think we would say.
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay, but you talk about how other male presenters possibly would have been applauded for some of the things that you were criticised for, that you were condemned for, and as a consequence of that, there is a deep desire to make this interview work.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, that wasn't my line.
Okay.
So that was a line that
slipped
now,
mate.
in.
That's, the print the legend. You can't disown it. It's out there now.
You're right, and actually, that's what that's part of the interest.
That's very new for you.
It is new for me, and I think one of the other things that's happened is I'm now reading newspaper articles that elide fact with drama.
Yes.
And that's so confusing for me. I read a piece, last week, and I couldn't work out whether it was a plot summary or a review or a news story about sort of Andrew moving out of his royal residence. And I just sat back and thought, this is the stuff that we talk about the whole time, with Baby Reindeer and The Crown, all the rest of it, where your worlds are slightly eliding, and it is a strange place to be for a news journalist.
Does it mean that you lose ownership?
Almost certainly.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Because this is, to use, I know you're a fellow Taylor Swift fan, this is very much Emily's version.
It is a team version.
Sure.
Actually, which I think that is critical, because one thing that the writer did, Jeremy did, was go to a lot of the members of the original Newsnight team. And so it isn't, thankfully, just my recollection. No. It's everyone's memory. And one of the most exciting processes has been finding out things from them that I remember differently.
Yes,
so we've all remembered things differently. And some of the lines that appear in the drama, I thought, never said that. And then I chatted to Esme and to Stuart, and they were like, no, he did. That absolutely came up. And so it's been incredible to make this almost like a composite, script of all the voices coming together, which has sort of taken the pressure off a bit as well. Yes. I don't feel like it's not just me sort of saying, not standing on Mount Sinai.
That's it,
with
isn't
my
it?
tablet.
It's a much bigger story than two people sitting down to have a conversation. I mean, it's got all the sort of trappings of epic drama. And as you say, the third episode after the denouement, almost the third episode is
the fallout.
The fallout, the most fertile. I mean, and game changing. So I'll end with the question that you completely ignored at the beginning, which is when in the room where it happens, did you feel your antennae start twitching in ways that they had never twitched before?
As soon as he started speaking.
Seriously?
Yeah. As soon as he started speaking, because there was a moment where I thought he would try and turn the whole interview into a promo for Pitch at the Palace.
Right.
And I thought, I could be in. Do you remember at the beginning of Frost Nixon, when the first hour that Frost has with Nixon, he just talks it out. He filibusters, just talks it out for the whole hour. And I thought, and we sort of, we've included a little bit of that in the drama. And I thought, for a moment, if he does that, if he just talks about charity work, what am I going to do? I've got nothing. And as soon as he accepted the premise, as we say, of the question, I thought, whatever you say here, it's not about guilt or innocence. Whatever you say is going to be absolutely fascinating because these questions have never been asked before.
Do you feel sorry for him at all?
I feel concerned, I think, on a very human level. I don't feel sorry that I did the interview, if that makes sense. I feel I feel uncomfortable at moments, and I feel concerned, and I think I'm also conscious, and this is something the drama says, that it's not just the ramifications on Andrew, it's everyone around him. It's the loyalties to others and the women in his immediate periphery, as well as, of course, to the Epstein victims that I guess lie at the heart of this story. And I suppose I'm concerned as well in a way that we don't actually have closure. No. We didn't get a trial. We did this forensic interview, which could be used as a document of public record, but it actually never went to court. We will never know. None of the Epstein victims ever sort of, as it were, got their moment to hold Epstein to account, and some of them, one of them clearly laid allegations at Andrew as well. And so there's always that sense of unfinished business, which I think, naturally makes you ask more questions.
A very royal scandal is on Prime now. I mean, you can watch it now.
Right now.
Yeah,
you have to watch it right now.
It's Mystery Hour next, but you can watch it at your convenience.
Thanks, James.
From here on, Emily
Amazon
Maitlis.
Prime. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Into Amazon Prime. I think it's just called Prime now.
It's embarrassing that you know that and I don't.
Well, you're the star of the...
Right, I will go away and do my homework.
I could be wrong. Anyway, Amazon Prime, call it what you will. It's on there, and it's called A Very Royal Scandal, and it's brilliant. Check it out. Emily Maitlis, presenter of the News Agents podcast. Many thanks indeed.
Thanks, James.
It's 12:01.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Lord, is that the time already? It is your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial. Mystery Hour is upon us. There's a prize as well. You can win. Do you know that? I mentioned this. I should mention this every week. Because I interviewed Emily just a moment ago, it means that very rare circumstances are now in play in the studio, which is you probably forgot that Mystery Hour was on the way. So you've got a better chance of getting through in the next 2 minutes than you have at any other 12:05 in 2024. But it will only last for a maximum of 2 minutes. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. This is a sort of exercise in illumination, education, elucidation. If you have a mystery that needs solving, a riddle that needs unravelling, an enigma that needs addressing, then the chances are that one member of the cleverest radio audience in the history of phone-in programmes will know the answer. But there's only one way to find out. You dial in with your question and someone else will ring in with the answer. My favourite contribution of the week wins a Mystery Hour board game. A beautiful piece of kit, actually, that has brought untold joy into countless households. And you can find out more about it at mysteryhour.co.uk. You can find the terms and conditions for the competition element of this morning's, this afternoon's entertainments at lbc.co.uk. We try to guard against repetition if you're new to this feature, although, to be fair, we kind of gave up on that long ago. If something came up last week and Keith and I can remember, then we may just bin it off. But to be fair, we've been doing it for so long that I can't even remember what I had for breakfast. I can't remember what topic we did in the first hour of the programme most days by the time we get around to 1 o'clock. So the idea that I'm going to be able to remember every single question that has popped up on Mystery Hour is, I'm afraid, fanciful. But we still try. And the only rule, and this is a proper rule, although we haven't had to implement it for a very long time, have we? You're not allowed to look stuff up. Obviously, if someone asks a question, you think, I know, I'll look that up in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Don't. Because the favourite part for me, often, not always, but often, the favourite part for me is when I say qualifications. What are your qualifications? And people, that's where the unbelievable stuff can happen. So qualifications could be something as banal as having watched it on television last night. When I say, what are your qualifications, it simply means, how do you know that thing that you claim to know? And the quality of your qualifications does two things. The first thing it does is establish in our minds some degree of certainty as to whether or not the answer you've provided is likely to be true, if there is any doubt about that in the first place. And the second thing it does is open up the possibility of magic. Because magic happens on the radio when people ring in who you can't quite believe are so well qualified to provide the contribution that they are making. And that is when we reach for the button marked Ray, the Ray Liotta, the shiniest bauble in the history of British radio, the most prized award that any radio presenter can ever bestow upon a humble listener. The Ray Liotta, reserved for the great late Ray Liotta, kindly agreed to record a little message that we have used. We should have kept count, Keith, shouldn't we, over the years? We should have some sort of record of how many times we've used it. But it is reserved for contributions from people whose qualifications to make that contribution are frankly unbelievable. And no text. We don't really take texts either. So be warned, be aware. Should we start? I think we should. Jim's in Lanark. Jim, question or answer?
Question, James, please.
Carry on, Jim.
Why do we laugh? And what's the mechanism in our brains and bodies that makes us laugh at something?
You can only have
or
one.
Not laugh at something.
You can only have one question. So it's like the evolutionary explanation, is it, of laughter?
Well, because I watched the American version of Have I Got News for You last night.
Oh, yeah. What's it called?
And I wondered why Have I Got News for You?
Oh, I gave that a lot of thought. Carry on.
And I watch it regularly in this country, and I laugh all the time. And I just sat there looking and thinking, what's the point of this programme? Not once, so there must be something that triggers in our brain. And what is the physical response? Why do we make that
I'm
noise?
zoning you in. I'm focusing you in on one question and one question only, which is, why do we laugh? That's a beautiful question. Why do we laugh? I mean, what purpose does it serve? I mean, we might feel a little bit better afterwards, but it doesn't improve our chances of survival necessarily, so there's no obvious evolutionary example of it. I like it a lot. I can't believe we've never had that before. We may have done.
Well, the reason I ask it, James, my 10 years ago, my midlife crisis was I started stand-up comedy as a hobby after meeting Billy Connolly.
Good grief.
And you write a set, you do the same set, and I've even done the same set twice in one night in 2 different shows, and you get 2 completely different reactions sometimes. So I'm just curious, why do we laugh?
How did it go? How did it go, your stand-up? Are you still doing?
I did about 400 gigs, started a comedy night and hosted it for 3.5 years, started a comedy festival that ran for 2 years, but then COVID got in the way. So I haven't done it since COVID, but one day I'll go back to it.
You will go back to it. This could be the moment. This could be the thing that girds your loins. Jim, thank you. Why do we laugh? 0345 6060 973. Let's go to Armagh in Northern Ireland. Catherine is there. Catherine, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on.
So what makes a beach more likely to have sea glass or ceramic in it than others? The reason I'm asking it is because I was on holidays with my boyfriend. We were in Arran, the Isle of Arran, and that beach has tons of sea glass and tons of ceramic, which I love for crafting. But then another holiday, we went to Dumfries and Galloway, and the beaches there, no sea glass, no ceramic. So it made me wonder what makes one beach more likely.
What is sea glass?
It's whenever glass has been in the ocean for so long and it's been rubbed up against
and it's been
rocks,
smooth and it's beautiful, and that's why and the same with ceramic. So it's bits of broken pot that have been burnished by the ocean, Catherine. Burnished by the ocean.
Yes.
Is the poetic way of putting it.
Exactly, yes. So it because it would be good to know then for me what beaches can I go to.
And you're certain that this is true? I mean, the beach is...
all the beaches that I go to now, I try to do this experiment to see, right, is there sea glass, is there ceramic? And so far, I've been to beaches this year.
Yeah, so it's come in from the sea, isn't it? It's not going to have been the stuff that got broken on the shoreline and then got burnished. Is Emily paying attention? Is Emily on a call? Do you see what happened, Emily? So Emily wrote on my switchboard, why on some beaches am I more likely to find more seagulls than others?
No, sorry, it must be the Northern Irish accent.
No nonsense. It's nothing to do with the accent. Emily's probably the hardest working person in the building, to be honest, particularly on Thursday between 12 and 1 o'clock. But that would have got on as well. But I was getting ready to answer that. I was thinking, well, it's obviously to do with food sources, Catherine. Give your head a wobble. It's obvious, isn't it? There's going to be more seagulls where there's chip shops and things like that are going to be. But no. So some abandoned beach in the middle of nowhere is not going to have a lot of seagulls hovering around hoping to get a cheap dinner. But sea glass and ceramics is a very different proposition. So why? I love it. And what kind of crafting do you do, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh God, what don't I do? At the minute I'm obsessed with crocheting, but whenever I do sea glass and ceramics, it's jewellery making.
Oh, lovely. Gosh.
Yeah.
How exciting.
And before I get cut off, can I just do a shout out to my boyfriend Andrew, because it was him that introduced me to you, and now we listen to Mystery Hour on all our road trips.
Oh,
so
that's
it's
nice.
Very exciting to get on and ask a question.
I was going to do a comedy no then, Catherine. I was going to say no, because I like to do that. When people have already done the shout out, I say no, because it's hilarious then, because you've already done it.
That's my favourite thing. People ask me a question, like, no, you can't.
No, you can't. But that was too touching for me to deploy that lazy trope. So yes, of course you can give a shout out to Andrew, and I'm grateful to everybody who helped spread the word about Mystery Hour in particular, and of course this programme in general. 12:15 is the time. So why do we laugh, and why are some beaches much richer sources of sea glass and ceramics, the sort of burnished mineral fruits of the sea? I don't know, I'm getting all poetic, than others. If you can answer either of those, you know what to do. It is 12:14.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:16. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Why do we laugh, and why do some beaches contain much more sea glass and ceramics burnished by the ocean? That's a poem waiting to be written. Burnished by the ocean. You can make it metaphorical about how our rough edges are smoothed by the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, by the tossing of tides, by the ebb and flow of the quotidian experience. I'll stop now. Nick's in Tunbridge Wells. Nick, question or answer?
Hello, James.
Hello.
It's a question.
Carry on.
Basically, do animals, cats and dogs mainly, suffer from sort of shame or embarrassment I was taking. I mean, the reason that I was thinking about it is, and I thought about it before, but I was taking my dog for a walk the other day, and he just loves the tennis ball and a stick.
Yeah.
He's not interested in other dogs. He's not very sociable like that. He sort of just wants to be around people.
Right.
And we were sort of walking through the park, and he just looks at me because he knows I've got the ball. He's just waiting for me to throw the ball, so he can just run after it. And he's looking at me all happy, and he just basically bonks his head straight. He's a big sheepdog. He bonks his head into a lamppost.
Oh.
And then he carries on looking at me.
Well, like a Dulux dog. Big, that kind of... Oh, lovely.
Yeah, he's got a sheepdog. And he carries on looking at me, but he looks a little bit embarrassed that he's done that. You know what I mean? And I just thought...
He did not look a bit embarrassed. Describe how he looked a bit embarrassed. For a start, with all that fur, how can you see his facial expressions?
Well, you can see his eyes, you can see his facial expressions.
The sadness, the embarrassment in his eyes.
Well, and it's all a bit shame. I think cats seem to have a bit of shame. Like, the sort of videos we've all seen, if they jump off a Christmas tree onto the curtains or something, and they can't make it, or they slip, or the curtains rip or something.
Who's going to know the answer? Who's going to know the answer to this?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. Maybe psychological veterinarian or something like that.
You never know for sure. But I mean, like falling off, like a cat misses, like jumps and misses, and then sort of slinks away.
They look a bit gutted, don't they? They look a bit disappointed in their actions because they're predators.
I think we think they do, but that's probably anthropomorphism kicking in, isn't it? That we are
we're projecting our embarrassment onto them.
Bingo. We attribute human reactions to our.
All right. Well,
I don't know.
I thought about that.
I don't know. Did the dog look sheepish?
Oh, he just looked lovely, and I just felt a bit sorry for him. And I just, don't do it again, Hamish.
Oh, mate, look out!
But he has done that before, actually. He'll do something. He'll bump into a bench or something.
Hasn't he got lots? Are his eyes not covered by fur sometimes? Is that not?
No, they're not. No, well, no.
They probably are a bit. What's his name? Hamish.
Hamish.
Oh, lovely name. Oh, I've never even met Hamish. I love him already.
Yeah, maybe I'll send a photo in.
Do that. I'd be surprised. All right, can dogs look sheepish?
0345 a study on it.
Of course they might. Of course they might.
University, veterinary university, or something.
Yes, who knows? I love it. It's a great question. I think projection is probably playing a part here, but you never know. I mean, they'll be aware, will they? I don't know. We'll find out. Alan's in Liverpool. Alan, question or answer?
Yeah, question, James.
Carry on, mate.
It's time zones.
Yeah.
When did people realise there was different time zones? I know there's GMT and all that, but when did they actually realise there's different time zones in the world?
Well, I mean,
because if you're travelling, as you're travelling along, you're not going to know, are you?
But you're going to notice day and night.
No, but what I mean is, like, you're going along on a horse, you're on foot, and it's you're not going to really notice it, are you?
No, but because you are, you're going to notice whether it's getting dark or not.
Yeah, but what I mean is, you can't follow the sunset, can you, or the sundown?
No, but you can sail for 24 hours, and end in the night time rather than obviously you should be in the daytime, so that you know. Mm. So I mean, the answer will be sea travel, won't it? I mean, they won't have named the time zones until. Well, that's where Greenwich Mean Time comes from, actually, is sea travel. So your answer is sea travel, once they started making long journeys by sea.
Oh, no, because I just thought of this the other day and I thought, I'm not Googling, I'll ask you instead.
It's a great question. I'm not going to take a round of applause for it, because but you wouldn't be able to do it. So you need a combination of timekeeping and quite swift, long I don't know. Wow, I'm going out on a bit of a limb here, Alan, but you'll bear with me. You'll hold my hand. You need it. So you need to be able to keep time and also make quite long journeys quite quickly. So I don't think you could do it on foot, for example, because you wouldn't be able to cover the... So you need to be able to cover 24 hours and go from somewhere light to somewhere dark. So 24 hours later, it should be light again, right? If you were where you started off, it would be daylight. If you start off in daylight and you go for 24 hours, it should be daylight again. Yeah?
No, but not really, no.
Yeah, of course it... All right. Where are you now?
What I mean, it depends. It's travel on a bit.
It's not the phone line. The phone line's gone a bit funny. You are currently in Liverpool. If you stayed put for 24 hours, it would now be outside your window in 24 hours' time, exactly like it is now. So if you set off now and 24 hours from now you were somewhere and it was the middle of the night, you'd know that you were in a different time zone. You'd know that there were different times. I think this is a really good answer. But I am prepared on this occasion to accept qualifications, clarifications, whatever it may be. Rob is in Chorley. Rob, question or answer?
James, answer to the sea glass question.
Carry on.
It's as simple as the proximity of the location to industry that used to dump waste into the sea. So I grew up in Sunderland in the northeast where there used to be a huge glass industry.
Are you serious?
The beaches have got loads of absolutely. And then down the road, I currently have a property in a place called Seaham, which is world famous for its sea glass. People, believe it or not, travel all over the world to come and pick up the sea glass. And it's as simple as there used to be a huge bottle works there, and they would just dump, waste into the sea. Over time, it gets washed by the salt and eroded, becomes smooth, and washes up on the beach. And when I was little, there was tons and tons and tons and tons of quite large, significant lumps of glass on the beach. Now people are searching for much smaller bits because people are just taking it away. There's no more of it, obviously, being produced naturally. The industry's gone, and that's why some beaches have more.
So you're not going to get any
industrial waste than others.
There's not going to be any on a desert island or anything like that.
Well,
so
not
to
unless,
speak of.
Somebody landed there and started a bottle works and now it's gone.
It's all right. On an always uninhabited desert island, not one that had a bottle works on it by accident. And this would apply to ceramics as well. This would.
And there's a certain amount of it obviously being moved around by, by patterns of currents and stuff like that. So you'll get bigger deposits where there's natural current washing stuff up on beaches that are in the way of that current, and stuff will travel on those current lines and maybe get washed up a bit. But you'll find higher concentrations in area where, and it's the same with coal. You'll find loads more sea coal where there used to be slag dumped out to sea, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And the same with ceramics. There have been potteries. There have been a lot of pottery going.
Well,
it's a beautiful answer. It's a beautiful answer. This qualifications. I know you've already told us, but for the tape.
Just growing up in regions of heavy industry, particularly glass.
It's a great question and a great answer. I love that. Rob, have a round of applause on me.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. Well played. It is 12:24. Vieri, a.k.a. Dr. Dog, which gives a bit of a clue as to which question it is that he's about to answer, is in Frankfurt. Vieri, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on.
Surprisingly enough. Yeah, the question of whether dogs can feel embarrassment or not.
Can they look
or
sheepish?
Shame.
Can they look sheepish?
Sheepdogs can.
Well,
all English sheepdogs.
That's what we're talking about. So go on. Yes, can dogs and cats, pets, animals, mammals?
Yeah, look, the answer is debatable. Some dogs can feel discomfort, obviously. They can feel a certain amount of self-shame, and they might feel perhaps a slight embarrassment, but a lot has to do with the fact that we tend to project our feelings and emotions into our dogs. It's called, anthropomorphism. So you humanize our dogs, and so the dog looks a bit, strange because he's just walked into a lamppost, and we think, oh, the poor thing, he's probably just hurt himself, and thinking, this hurts, chuck me the ball now.
And we're thinking, God, he looks embarrassed. Because we would.
Yes, exactly. It's a bit like when you come home and you're annoyed that your dog has done number 2 in the corner, but the dog's forgotten. He just picks up on your emotions and tries to pacify you for the fact that you've come home and are annoyed, but he doesn't know who's done number 2 in the corner.
So those faces, we see them on the internet quite a lot when a sofa has been savaged by a dog and the photograph, the face of the dog in the photograph looks sheepish. It looks apologetic. That's just an anatomical coincidence.
No, it's pacifying behavior. The human comes in and finds his sofa being destructed and is annoyed. And the dog picks up on that and thinks, oh, my God, what's wrong with you? I might as well pacify you. I'm sorry for whatever it is that makes you angry.
So maybe deploying the same behavioural palette that you'd deploy if you wanted to get fed or something. You're just trying to make the human like you more.
Yes, to a certain extent, yes. That's actually exactly what's going on.
Qualifications?
They're trying to... Well, I work with dogs.
That'll do. And a round of applause for Vieri, for Dr. Dog. You can find out more about Dr. Dog on his website. 27 after 12 is the time. Lee is in Croydon. Lee, question or answer?
Question, please.
Carry on, Lee.
Vernal equinox. That's when the sun is directly above your head.
Yes.
Is there a vernal equinox for the moon? Because I've never seen the moon directly above my head.
You've never had a moon directly above your head?
Never. It's always at an angle in the distance.
You never shared a bunk bed with an older brother, then?
No.
That's pathetic. So you would. I mean, is it geographical? Would it depend on where we are in the world?
Oh, I've got absolutely no idea whatsoever.
Okay. I think it probably would, but and that's what it's called, is it? A vernal equinox.
Oh, it is for the sun, but I don't know if I'm just
I see.
applying the same principle to the moon.
Got it. Well, I mean, it's there must be somewhere in the world where the moon is directly above your head, no? So you'd sort of bend your head right back and you'd look up and it would just be... No, right. It must. I don't know. Actually, I'll stop talking. This is one of my many areas of well-established ignorance. But is it possible to have the moon directly above your head? That's the question that we want.
Yes, please.
And how much attention have you paid on your travels, Lee? Most nights, are you just double-checking that you haven't accidentally ended up directly beneath the moon?
Well, I've done a stint of 53 years, and I've been out at night during that time. But I must confess, I've never seen it above my head.
There we go. Let's see what we can do for Lee. Is it possible? Where do you need to be? Maybe the question. But the first question is it possible for the moon to be directly above your head as a normal human, just a normal man, an innocent man? It is coming up to 12:30. We've got time for another. Andy's in Hampton Court. Andy, question or answer?
It's a question, James. Hi, how are you?
Very well. What's on your mind? Let's go.
My question is about the eye and the auto-iris that the eye has. So when you're outside in bright sun, your iris closes down to let a certain amount of light get to the retina. When you go into a dark room from outside, it'll open up and allow more light in. So when you put sunglasses on, why doesn't the iris open up to accommodate for the dark lens you put in front of your eye? Like if it was an auto-iris camera, and you put something dark in front of it, the iris would automatically open up.
How do you know it doesn't?
Why doesn't the human eye do that?
Yeah, how do you know it doesn't?
How do I know it doesn't work?
How do you know that your iris doesn't open up more when you put sunglasses on?
Well, because if I take them off, it's brighter. If you look through, half through a sunglass lens and half at the real light, then that doesn't change. That doesn't change when you put the sunglasses on.
How do you know?
Because I was a cameraman, I know about these things. It's always.
But I've always presumed that if you put dark lenses over your eyes, then the iris will open a bit.
But it apparently doesn't, because it's darker with the glasses on than it is with them off.
Darker with the glasses on. Yeah. I don't quite understand the question, but I'm someone listening will. And hang on, just stay there a second. Do you
baffles me?
Just checking with Keith. Are we clear on this one? I'd have thought if you've got dark glasses on, then the irises will open a bit. Sure.
But the iris doesn't appear to open up like it would do on an auto-iris camera or something.
All right. But it would do it if it was just normal darkness.
Well, no, you can put sunglasses on in a room and the room will just be dark. It doesn't open up. The room is dark. You would have thought that if you put sunglasses on inside,
So why don't sunglasses make your iris open?
Exactly.
Okay. All right, it's on the board. I still think they probably would, but like you say, you've done the research. I haven't. Andy, thank you. 12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
34 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Why do we laugh? That's a specific question about the evolutionary function. Don't get in touch with things you find funny. Why do we laugh? Because my dad just told me a really good joke. Or the dog broke wind. We've done the sea glass and ceramic. That was a lovely little exchange, wasn't it? We've done the dogs and cats. That was also lovely. When did we discover different time zones? And is it possible for the moon ever to be directly above our head? Plural or singular, doesn't matter which. And why does the iris of the eye not dilate when we put sunglasses on? There's a premise to that question that I'm still not entirely sure about, but Andy was, and it's his question, so the question stands. Perry's in Canary Wharf. Perry, question or answer?
Hi, James. Good afternoon. I've got a question.
Carry on.
And it's about generations, or rather the naming of generations.
Yeah.
I am just on the cusp of baby boomers and Generation X, born in 1964.
Okay.
So it's called baby boomers, right? And the one before that was the silent generation. That ended at the end of the Second World War.
Yeah.
I believe you're Generation X, right?
All day long.
Followed by millennials and so on. Look, the question is, how do they get names, and who names them and when? So baby boomers, that lasted 18 years. What happens in 1964? Did they say, "Well, we've stopped booming the babies now. Let's get on to Generation X"? And how do they?
I think it's a really interesting question actually, and you will be unsurprised to learn, Perry, that I'm going to have a go at answering it. I think it's just what you'd call common parlance. So the baby boom, the post-war baby boom, so that therefore the babies born during the boom became known as baby boomers. I don't think there's like an office of generational nomenclature that determines that they are. It just catches on. But there is a specific answer to your question, which is Douglas Coupland.
Which is what?
Douglas Coupland. It's spelled Coupland. I think I'm never quite sure whether it's Coupland or Copeland. Now, he wrote a book in the early to mid 90s. He wrote a brilliant book called Generation X, and he is credited with there's maybe a bit of chicken and egg. What came first, the name or the book? But I think he's widely credited as having come up with the phrase.
Right. Okay.
And that led to Generation Y and we've now got Gen Z, haven't we, or Gen Z? So Douglas Coupland, if you had to identify one source, he's probably done more to define generations than anybody else has. But the broad answer to the question is that something just catches on.
That obviously makes sense, right? But some of them are so short. So. The Generation Alpha is only 12 years, and that finishes very soon. That's kind of that's about to finish. Generation Alpha.
I don't know that one. I mean, it gets a bit confusing, doesn't it? Because there are specific terms for what a generation means in sort of chronological times. I don't know what Generation Alpha is. Do you?
Well, So you mentioned Generation Z, but that finished. Did it?
Then we went to Alpha. Of course, after you ran out of letters, you go back to the beginning again. So that would all trace back, I think, to Douglas Coupland and just inventing Generation X, because there wasn't a Generation W, was there, or a Generation V, or a Generation U? I could carry on with this for quite a long time, or a Generation T.
Well, there might have been.
No, but there wasn't.
But they subsequently maybe got called. Whatever characterised that period of time, right? So the Great Generation, the Silent Generation, they kind of are very subservient, obedient, following on, and they didn't have to serve in the war.
No, I understand it. It just caught on. I think the phrase just caught on. I don't think there's there you go. Douglas Coupland popularised the term in his 1991 novel Generation X, Tales for an Accelerated Culture. So I give myself a round of applause, Perry. Do you agree?
Well, I would, except why would Silent Generation specifically finish in 1945 as if to say it's the start of something different? So and because
the war did.
Different, yeah. But
what?
That okay. So
if you were born in January 1946 and you want to be in the Silent Generation, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm going to allow that.
There's a cusp between the two.
Yeah, but it's not like a deadline. It's not a razor, is it? It doesn't come down like a guillotine.
But they've already chosen Generation Alpha and Generation Beta as how long they're going to be, and they're different sizes.
Well, I think you're getting confusing now because I've answered your question.
Okay, well, fair enough. But if somebody can embellish it with
how are you going to embellish it? I've named the blooming author of Generation X.
I might look that person up then.
It's a brilliant book. It's a superb book. He's written loads of brilliant books. He's one of the first famous people I met as a journalist, as opposed to as a sort of spotty schoolboy trying to get Ian Botham's autograph at the Worcester Cricket Ground. I remember he was absolutely charming. He really was. Billy Idol, of course, had a band called Generation X. But that's not where I think that's not where it comes from. That's a round of applause for me anyway. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Take care, Perry. If you can embellish that, then feel free. Frank's in Kings Lynn. Frank, question or answer?
Oh, it's an answer, James.
Carry on, Frank.
It's about the moon and the sun. Yeah. Yes. Unfortunately, we live in the northern latitude, so it will never ever be directly overhead of us. As you go south towards the equator, you will get the moon directly overhead and the sun overhead. But It's because we're at a slight incline.
Yes.
We're at an incline of 15 degrees to the sun, and the moon itself is at 5 degrees to us. So they the way we orbit.
So it's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen unless you are in somewhere sort of between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn.
So if Lee wanted to see a moon directly above his head, he should go on holiday somewhere between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn.
Yeah, and believe it or not, one of the guys who worked all this out was a man called Eratosthenes back in the Egyptian period, where he measured the angle of the sun causing a shadow at one point in Egypt, but at a different length of shadow in another point. And he worked out roughly the diameter of the Earth.
Wow. That's incredible, isn't it?
It really is. And I've spoken to you once before on an astronomical matter.
Well, you've second guessed my next question there, I think, Frank. What are your qualifications?
I'm a very, very keen amateur astronomer, fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society as well.
Beautiful stuff. Is Norfolk particularly conducive to astronomy? Because it's so clear. I always think of Norfolk in daylight.
There's been some really good displays of the aurora.
Yeah.
We do get some good clear nights, and coming up at the beginning of next month is the big week at Kelling, where hundreds of astronomers descend on Kelling caravan site, and they turn all the lights at night, and they scream at you if you've even got a little bit of light showing.
Really?
And we're all doing astrophotography, and it is a dark skies area.
Well, I'm glad I asked that question, actually. And do you all stay in the caravans, or do you all stay up all night?
If it's a good night, then we're outside, and I'm now dead lazy. I've got stuff I can set up, go back to bed, and then go and collect the data in the morning.
Okay. Is it near Sheringham, Kelling?
Yes, that's the one. Yeah,
I know it. I had no idea it had an astronomical.
Yeah, and then our group, the Kings Lynn and District Astronomical Group, we also go to. I know you know Norfolk fairly well.
Not as well as you. Not as well as you, I wager, Frank.
we go to Burnham Deepdale, where they
Lovely.
hold a couple of events, and we get out the telescopes, and we're there just doing an outreach. It's the kids that are coming round and looking through a telescope.
It's exciting. You can't beat it. How many people, and this is a completely personal inquiry based upon, you're right, the amount of time I spend in particularly North Norfolk. How many people, can you use the same telescopes for ornithology that you use for astronomy?
Yes, you can. And we've had that question from the Twitchers coming in at Titchell RSPB.
I know it well.
Could we look at the moon with our telescope?
Yes.
We say, well, it's a blooming telescope, sir.
How many people double up? A bit like, ornithologist by day, astronomer by night, with the same kit and caboodle.
We've got a few. We've got a couple in our club.
I thought you might. I love that. That's absolutely brilliant. Frank, thank you. Have another round of applause on me.
Thank you.
Is it for you? Is it just astronomy, or have you shown any interest in the Shakespeare-related revelations happening at that big building in the town square in Kings Lynn?
Oh, that's very interesting in itself.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it true, or is it just someone with quite a good eye for marketing claiming that they've unearthed some floorboards that Shakespeare would once have trodden upon, do you think?
Well, let's face it, anything's possible, but I don't know how good the roads were coming to Norfolk in those days.
No, this is very true. I don't know how good they are now. It's a story about... What's it called, Frank? What's the building called?
Oh, that's the old Guildhall.
The Guildhall, the old Guildhall. I also found out a lot about the Hanseatic League. Is it the merchants and the kind of pre-European Union, or at least trading relationships? But they're doing up the old Guildhall. They keep running out of money. But they reckon they've found evidence of the stage. They found a stage that we know Shakespeare visited, and that the King's Men, his troupe of artistes, performed at the old Guildhall in King's Lynn. That's how old it is. It goes back to the 17th century. But they reckon that they have, when they ripped up some floors or knocked down some walls, they reckon they found a stage upon which Will Shakespeare himself would once have trod. Indeed, they found the boards what Will has trod, you might say. But I've got a soft spot for Kings Lynn, as you can probably tell. Frank, great work. 12:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:47. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And Nick from Tunbridge Wells has sent me a picture of Hamish looking quite sheepish. The old English sheepdog, a beautiful animal. We've got a tiny dog. I don't generally get on with big dogs. I didn't get on with dogs at all until we got a relatively little dog, and now I'm a lot more amenable to dogs in general. But it'll be a long time, Nick, before I'm ready for a dog that size. But what a handsome fella he is, honestly. And of course, Dr. Dog himself answered the question of whether or not dogs can be embarrassed. The answer is no. We will almost certainly be projecting onto them, or they might have some awareness that we're very cross with them, and therefore they're just trying to be cute, which might translate as embarrassment to our human eyes, but it would be the same sort of face that they pull when they just want to be fed. 12:48 is the time. Questions that still need answers. Why do we laugh? When did we discover time zones? I like that question. I have not answered it. I may have answered it inadvertently, but I didn't provide any qualifications or evidence for my answer. So if you can answer that from a position of evidence and or knowledge, then there is a Mystery Hour round of applause. And remember, quite possibly a Mystery Hour board game waiting for you. 0345 606 0973. When did we realise that there were different time zones in the world? And why does our iris in our eye not dilate when we put on sunglasses, given that usually when you reduce the amount of light reaching your eye, the iris dilates? It is 12:49. Steve is in Chester. Steve, question or answer?
Question, James.
Carry on, Steve.
Right, when I load my washing machine with my duvet, pillows, socks, underpants...
Duvet cover.
You're right. And I put it on a 59-minute wash.
Yeah.
When it's done its cycle and spin and everything, all the contents of my wash is inside the duvet cover.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Well, the good news is it's not just you. It happens to everyone.
No, it's not just me.
No, it's definitely not just you. So
no.
I think the answer is it's easy to get in, but it's not very easy to get out.
Well, but I throw the duvet cover in just any old way. I don't leave it,
No, I know.
It's all scrunched up. And
I know, but it's not for long, is it? As it rotates and bangs about in the drum, it's easy to get in, but once it's in, it gets entangled and it's much harder to get out. So if you've got a duvet cover and 10 random items, physics, isn't it? Physics tells us...
Well, maybe centrifugal forces in there somewhere.
Exactly that. So physics tells us that the random items are going to make their way into the duvet cover, but physics also tells us that they're going to struggle to get out.
Well, but hang on a minute. Don't forget, the duvet cover's got one opening. What if there's stuff behind the duvet or the opposite side? How come it still all ends up in there?
All right, here's an experiment for you. Climb into your duvet cover.
Uh-huh.
How easy would that be?
Oh, I mean, I have the issue when I'm trying to put the duvet into the duvet.
No, that's not. No, that's not what I'm asking, because that's a very specific challenge where the duvet has to fit perfectly into. It's very easy to get a duvet into a duvet cover. It is a little less difficult, although I do know a little trick if you want me to tell you at the end of this interlude. It's much harder. It's much easier. You can get a duvet into a duvet cover. It's a piece of cake. It's just not necessarily going to be in the duvet cover in the way that you want. But we're not talking about duvets. We're talking about you, Steve, and the duvet cover. So here's a duvet cover. I'm handing you a double bed, king-size bed, duvet cover. How easy is it for you to get inside it?
I don't know. I'd probably just throw it over myself.
Yeah. So the answer to the question is very, very easy, James.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very easy for me to get into a duvet cover.
Okay.
However, a duvet cover in...
Can you stop? I have not finished. The experiment is still going on, Steve.
Oh, come on then. All right, I'm listening.
Right, you're now inside the duvet cover.
I am.
Okay, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to sort of roll around a lot on the floor. I want you to get really entangled in the duvet cover. And now I want you to tell me, how easy is it to get out?
It's going to be difficult to get out.
Bingo!
I'd have to unroll myself.
Yes, exactly. And that is what happens to your pants.
I'm not convinced because
What?
it's inside the drum of a washing machine.
Yes, but it's got
not,
into it easily. Because think of all the opportunities it has. So look, here's the drum of the washing machine. The duvet's going round. And I'm going to use the word hole to describe. No, aperture, sock, aperture, sock, aperture, sock, aperture, sock, aperture, sock. You've got all these opportunities for the sock to pass through the aperture. At which point it gets entangled in the way that you did, and it becomes measurably harder for the sock to pass back out of the aperture.
So what are you saying then? It's centrifugal force?
Yeah.
Or physics?
Yeah, all of that.
All of that.
Not really. What I'm saying is that when you're in it, you get all tangled up and it makes it harder to get out of it, innit?
Well, the difficulty for me to understand is how it gets in the first place.
Aperture, sock, aperture, sock, aperture, sock, aperture, sock, aperture, sock, aperture, sock.
I'm purposely putting myself into the duvet cover.
Yeah. Yeah, because you've got one go. You've got one go. You've got
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
Time the drum goes round. There's almost infinite variations of aperture sock relations going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know how to get the duvet cover? Get the duvet in the duvet cover quite easily.
Well, what I do, I turn the duvet cover inside out.
There it is.
Grab the two far ends.
Yeah.
And sling it on.
That's the spirit, Steve. I'm taking a round of applause for this, by the way, whether you like it or not.
No problem, mate. Yeah, enjoy the show and enjoy the chaps either side of the show.
Likewise. Thank you, mate. Right. Stay safe. I'll take that. Thank you very much. Aperture, sock, aperture, sock. Stacey's in Barnet. Stacey, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
It's for the eye question.
Oh, yes.
So I totally agree with you. Whenever anything is much brighter, the pupil gets smaller, and whenever it's darker, it gets bigger. I do believe that when you've got sunglasses on, the pupil would get a bit bigger.
Thank you.
But I've thought laterally outside the box as to why that chap might have thought that was happening. And if he's put his sunglasses on and then he's looked in the mirror to check the size of his pupil, he would actually be looking up close. And near vision has this amazing reflex called the accommodative reflex, where you get a thickening of your lens, you get slight changing of movement of the eyes, and believe it or not, you get a slight constriction of your pupil. So it might be that he's looking up close and the pupil's constricting due to the accommodative reflex, and not actually because if someone else looked at him from a distance, they would see that his pupil was getting bigger with his sunglasses on.
I think you're right. Qualifications?
And that, by the way, just to explain, is why as you get older, as I call it a bit vintage, why you need glasses for reading, because that process where the lens thickens doesn't happen so easily, and then you need glasses to help you focus.
That's a bit close to the bone, that, Stacey.
I'm an ophthalmic surgeon, Dr. Strong.
Blimey. Well done.
Thank you so much.
I didn't mean well done for being an ophthalmic surgeon. That would sound quite patronising. I meant well done on answering the question so well, which I'm allowed to say without sounding patronising. I say that to everybody.
I think that's probably what's happening, is probably just looking in a mirror and looking up close.
Yeah, I think you're right. And yeah, that all fits. That all. The reason I said it's a bit personal is I think I'm there now, as I literally in the last 3 or 4 months. Well, hang on a minute. I'm getting paid for this. At least one of us is getting paid. I'm pretty sure I need reading glasses. I'm getting there now. It's because you sort of feel it, don't you? You feel yourself straight. And also, Keith reminds me, I keep mispronouncing people's name from the switchboard, but I don't know if that's reading glasses or if that is long.
It probably would be. Go and get yourself a pair of +2s from a shop and see how you get on.
Like that. Great work. Thank you. Round of applause. No, good work. Thank you, Stacey. There you go. I think, Andy's qualifications notwithstanding, an ophthalmic surgeon is better qualified than a cameraman to talk about eyes. I just think that. Matt's in Leamington Spa. Matt, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on.
So it's an answer to your caller about the time zone question.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Time zones were sort of invented in the 1840s. There was a railway opened in the UK between London and Bristol, and travellers with pocket watches noticed that the time in London was different to the time in Bristol. Off the back of that, a thing called railway time was invented, which later became British Standard Time. And then that sort of bled out through the British colonies where they noticed that.
So it had nothing to do with ships and everything to do with my central principle about speed of journey and ability to track time stands, but it was a train, not a ship, that first did it.
Yeah, basically, and then the telegraph kind of proved it in the United States when they're able to send a message from one side of the US to the other side, and it arrived at a different time, so they knew they were in different time zones.
Well, I never.
There you go.
That's a brilliant answer. My teeth hurt a bit, which is a sign of something that I am awed by without fully understanding.
Oh, well, I'm glad I could. I'm
nearly there. Qualifications?
I am first and foremost a nerd, and I sort of am into railway history, but I'm also an airline pilot, so I battle with time zones all the time and have had a similar question as to why they existed. So when
you looked it up?
Yeah.
Why did you, if you're a train nerd, why did you become a pilot and not a train driver?
There is more street cred in becoming a pilot than there is in being a train driver.
Oh, Lord. I can't believe you said that out loud. I'll let Sheila handle that as her 1 o'clock topic. What's cooler, train drivers or airline
I have to say, I think train drivers are cooler.
I do too, but I don't want to upset Matt.
Sorry
he's a listener
about that.
He's a paying customer, He's a paying customer. Thank you, Matt. Take care.
Cheers, James. Bye.
Round of applause. Absolutely. A round of applause. I'm going to give I was going to give it to Frank, but I've got a feeling that Frank isn't that interested in how do you say that word? Astronomical mysteries. So I'm going to give it to Perry. What? Duvet, Steve or Perry? No, I'm going to give it to Perry. I sense Perry will value it more. The mystery hour ball game goes to Perry. That's it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. So download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now...
James O'Brien on LBC.